Before I can give you an overview of Excel 2016, in other words, what you're looking at when you open up the program and going over the basics of the program, I need to open up Excel 2016. I can either do that by double-clicking on the shortcut that's on my desktop or with a single click on the shortcut that's on my taskbar. Now, if you want to add these shortcuts to your desktop or the taskbar like I have, then come over here and click on the Start button, click on All Programs, and it's sorted alphabetically, so find the E's. And there we go. There's Excel 2016. Give it a right click, and in the shortcut menu, you can select Pin to Taskbar. Well, mine says Unpin because currently it's right there. It's pinned to the taskbar. So if I want to remove it, then I'd select Unpin. Or if you want it as a shortcut on your desktop, then go down to Send To because you want to send it to over and up to the desktop as a shortcut. Let me click off. So to open up the Excel 2016 program, I have two options, either double click or single click. Let's go with the single click, and there you go. Every time you open up Excel 2016, you get the startup screen. In other words, in earlier versions of Excel, it took you right to a blank workbook. And I'll show you how you can disable the startup screen so it takes you right to the blank workbook in a later training video. But for right now, when you open it up, you have over to the left-hand side the most recent workbooks that I've been working on, which is like Import Contacts, Ghost Hunting. Ooh, sounds spooky. And you can see when I hover over it, below my pointer, there's a pop-up. And it tells you that this workbook is on the C drive under the user who logged in as training, and it's on the desktop, and then the name of the workbook. So when I click on it, it'll automatically open it up because it's on the desktop. That is, unless I moved it, and if I moved it when I click on it, it'll say it can't find it. In which case, I'll have to come down here and click on Open Up Other Workbooks to be able to search and find that workbook so I can work on it. But to keep it simple, let's go ahead and start with a blank workbook. Click on it, and there we go. Now to give you a basic overview of what you're looking at in Excel 2016, I'm going to start up at the top in the left-hand corner and go from left to right and then top to bottom. In the upper left-hand corner, you have what's called the Quick Access Toolbar, and it's called that because you can quickly access any command on it in a single click. Like the first one, you can see when I hover over it, gives you the name of the command. It's called Save. And then if you don't want to click on it, you want to use shortcut keys. It's got those keys there, Control S. And I'll show you how you can customize this Quick Access Toolbar in a later training video. Then over to the right in the middle, you have what's called the Title Bar. That's the title of the workbook. It gives you a generic name every time you create a new blank workbook. That is until you save it. And when you save it, you can name it to something more pertinent to what's going on in your workbook. Like if it's about sales charts or something like gummy bears, then go ahead and rename it. And then to the right of that, you have the name of the program that you currently have open. In case if you forgot, it's Excel. And then over to the right of that, you have the ribbon display options, which we'll cover later on. Then the window options, you can minimize this, restore it down, or close out of it completely. And then below that, you have this long strip that contains all these commands. It's called a ribbon. And on that ribbon, you have different tabs that helps organize those commands. So when you want to insert something, you'd go to the Insert tab, and you got all these different commands to work with. Now within each tab, let me go back to the Home tab, you have these commands that are separated then into groups. So you have these thin lines. I don't know if you can see them, they're kind of faded. But in between those thin lines, you have the name of the commands for that group or that belong to that group. Like when it comes to formatting the font, like if you want to make it bold, italics, underline, give it some color, change the font type, and so forth, look to the font group. And some of these groups have more commands than what meets the eye here. Then in the lower right-hand corner of some of these groups, you have a little arrow that points out, not styles, but like the font here. It's called the Expandable Dialog Box button because when you click on it, it expands open into a new window here, and there's the Font tab for the font group, and it has basically everything that you see here, plus some additional commands. So you've got the font type, the font size, there's the font type, the font size. But what you don't see here is like strike through or superscript, and you can see in the preview window what happens when you check these off or you change the font type or make it underline or change the color. Click Cancel. Now below the ribbon, you have here, the left-hand side, what's called the name box. And the name box gives you the name of the cell that you currently are working in or you have selected. Now the cell down below is in the spreadsheet and only have one. You can add additional spreadsheets, but the spreadsheet is just basically a sheet that has a bunch of cells. Now these cells, when you want to work in them, you come down and you click on one, and notice that at the intersection of the cells, you're looking at these column labels up at the top that are alphabetical, and these row labels over the left-hand side that are numerical. So when I'm like, okay, what column, what row am I in? If you get really far out here, you have to look over here, then try to keep your eyes on here, and oh, well, it's shaded over there, so it ought to be fairly easy to identify. But even easier than that is the name box. You can see I'm in N20, column N, row 20. You can also come up in here, click in it, type in A2 and hit enter. Automatically takes you to that cell as well. So it identifies what cell you're in and also acts as a go-to box. Then over to the right, you have what's called the formula bar. So when you're working in a cell, and the cell is only yay big, I mean you can stretch it, but if you want to keep the size small, whatever you have selected here, you can look up here and you can see it's pretty long, so it can display quite a bit. In fact, if you want to click on the expand arrow, you can see a lot more of the contents within that cell. So speaking of the cells down below, the two main purposes of the Excel workbook is to either perform calculations, functions, or formulas. So you can go ahead and do some simple mathematics like 2 plus 2 or more complex ones. And you can also use it as a database or a combination of both. So for example, as a database, if you type in like the label for this column, which would be first name, that would be last name, street address, phone number, and so on. Then below the first name column, you type in everybody's first name, and then everybody's last name, and so on. And then once you have a database that's organized correctly, which we'll talk about in later training videos, you'll be able to sort these and also filter and quickly get the information that you need out of that database. Now down below, out of the main working area, again, you've got your sheet 1. You can add additional sheets, and when you save it, whether you have 1 sheet, 2 sheets, or 3 sheets, when you save it, it's referred to as a workbook. Just think of it like a regular book. You flip through the page. I've never seen a book that has 1 page, but you can add more if you want. And in any case, you can also navigate between the sheets when you have tons of sheets to go through. You can also use the scroll bar to click and drag over to the right. Of course, it only goes over so far unless you want to click on the right arrow, and also up and down. And then below that, you have what's called the status bar. Right now, it tells me it's ready. The cell that I'm looking in is ready for me to enter in some data, or it'll show me that I'm in edit mode or anything else that I need to be aware of. You can also customize the status bar by right-clicking on it. And you can see right now that when I'm working with numbers, if I select a range of cells that has a bunch of numbers in it, it'll automatically give me the sum of that down below in the status bar. But it's not showing it right now because I don't have a range of cells with numbers in it to work with to select. And so if you don't want to see that when you're selecting cells that have numbers in it down below in the status bar, just deselect it so it removes the check, and then you won't see it. But I'm going to go ahead and check it and reselect it, click off. Then over to the right, you have your different views. You have the default view, which is the normal view. Then you've got page layout. You can hover over it and see the name of it pop up. Then also page break preview. And those views are also available, as it would make sense, on the view tab. Over in the workbook views, normal, page break, page layout, the more popular views. And it makes it nice because if you're on the home tab and you're working with a lot of commands here, you don't have to switch to the view tab with 1 click to 2 clicks. You can just come down here in a single click and change the view. And then you have the zoom feature. If you want to click and drag over to the right to zoom in, let me go over just a little bit. Whoa, you can really get close and up front and personable. Or you can click and drag and swing it all the way out and become more distant from your data. And if you're having a hard time with the slider here because you want to get to exactly 65, well that says 64, but when I click on it, I can come in here and say 65 and click okie dokie. Or let me click on it and go back to 100% and click OK. And you'll see up here that column A has disappeared. Well, that's because I scrolled over too far. So if I want to go back to column A, then I've got to scroll over and then I can see it. Or hold down the control key on the keyboard and hit the home key. Control home takes you right to the first column and the first row. And the name of that cell is A1. There are a few things I want to show you that you can do to customize your Excel environment that I think you may find helpful. One, up at the top, you have the white text against the dark green background. If you want to find out what other Office theme colors are available, then go ahead and click on the File tab to go backstage. Go down to Options. General is selected by default, so just come down and go over to Personalize your copy of Microsoft Office. Now in this section, it's going to personalize all of Office, not just Excel, otherwise it would have said Excel. So for example, the Office theme is colorful. Ooh, that sounds fun. You can click on the drop-down arrow and, ooh, only a couple of choices here. In any case, if I select white, it's going to update all of Microsoft Office, all the applications you have installed on your computer. Not just going from the dark green in Excel to white with black text against a white background, but also in Word, it'll have, instead of the blue up at the top, but black text against a white background. Now, since we're here, before I go ahead and click OK to see this in action, we've got our username here. Go ahead and replace whatever name you have there. with your name because in later training videos, we want to be able to identify who made changes to the workbook. And if you got something else there, well, that's just not doing it for me. Go ahead and update it so we know who made changes. And then with that, let's go ahead and click Okie dokie. And there you go. No dark green. The dark green has now been isolated to the File tab and the Share tab here. So File tab for the Backstage. And by the same token, like I said, because it applies to all of the Microsoft Office applications, when I open up Microsoft Word, Access, PowerPoint, let's go ahead and go down and right-click to get to the jump list, open up Microsoft Word here. There you go. The dark blue has been isolated to the File tab, the Share tab, instead of the white text against the dark blue background. And so by the same token, because it updates all of the Office applications, if you're in another Office application like Word, then go ahead and click on the File tab to go Backstage, down to Options, General selected by default, so come down here, and there it is, Office Theme. We can go back to something colorful. And then click Okie dokie, and then we're back to the default theme, blue for Word, close out, and dark green for Excel. Now, anytime you create a new workbook and you're saving it for the first time, it's going to perform a Save As. So if I come up here and I click on the Save button, it's going to take me backstage, and in the Save As section, it's going to ask me two questions. First off, it's going to start me with, where do you want to save it? Do you want to save it to the PC, to the OneDrive? And if you want to save it to this PC, it gives you a few options here. So you can go ahead and click Browse. When I open up Browse, the default location is going to be the Documents. What if you don't want to save every new workbook you create into the Documents folder? What if the default folder is going to be a folder on your desktop or just your desktop? To go ahead and customize this so you don't have to go, okay, now I got to come over here, select the desktop so it's on my desktop, and find my folder, Exercises, double click on it to save it in there. Forget all that, click Cancel, and you can set the default by coming down here to the Options, and then come up and select Save, and then come down, and we're looking at the default local file location. You can see from the hard drive, which is the C drive, to the users that log in, I'm logged in as training, is going to be the Documents folder. If I'm like, no, I want it to be to my desktop, then go ahead and delete that, and let's type in training to the desktop, and then click OK. Or if on the desktop you have a folder that you always want to save it into, then go ahead and do a backslash, which is the key above the Enter key on the keyboard, and type in the name of the folder on the desktop, like Spiffy, if you have something spiffy on the desktop, or if you have a spiffy folder on the desktop. And within that folder, backslash, you may have another folder, it's called Sales. So if you do have that on the desktop and it can see it, it'll be okay with it. But when I click OK, it says, I can't find this directory. You don't have a folder called Spiffy on the desktop, let alone a sales folder within the Spiffy folder that's not there. So we'll say OK. So we'll come back in here and delete all that and just say OK. Save it to my desktop as the default every time I save my workbook for the first time. And go ahead and click Okie dokie. So when I come up here and click on Save, it takes me backstage, click Browse, and it goes to the desktop and not the Documents folder. Let me close out of here and click back. When I click on Save, it goes backstage. When it goes backstage, I get these options, OneDrive or the PC. What if, for the sake of argument, I always want to save it to my computer and not have to go backstage and then click on Browse, which opens up the Save As window, which is an extra click to be able to save it to my computer. You can go ahead and change and customize the environment so it actually opens up the Save window without coming to the Backstage first to the Save As section. So to do that, let's go to Options, go to Save, and it's right here. Check Don't show the Backstage when opening or saving files. We just want to bypass it completely. So click Okie dokie. And so when I come up here and click Save, it doesn't go backstage, does it? Automatically opens up the Save As window, so it saves me an extra click, so that bypasses that. And I can just go right here and say, okay, it's on my desktop, it doesn't go backstage. Fabulous. Go ahead and type in a name, click Save, and you got your workbook saved. Now remember, when I closed out of my workbook and we opened it up, anytime we want to, well, begin a new session here, it comes to the startup screen. Well, if you don't want to see the startup screen, but always go right to the blank workbook, then to customize that, just, again, Backstage, File, go down to Options, General is selected by default, so come down here to the very bottom and uncheck Show the Start Screen when this application starts. Click Okie dokie. So when I close out, double-click to open it up. There we go, right to the clean worksheet. Now, that has pros and cons. If you're working on recent files, then you won't be able to get that startup screen where you can click on the recent file. But if you're generally creating new workbooks and you don't need to see the recent files, then go ahead and set it this way. At the very least, you can always come backstage clicking on the File tab, taking a look at what's recent over here by default, and then click on it to open it up. Let's click back to go back to the front stage. And as far as recents go, you can always right-click down below if you have the shortcut pinned to the taskbar. And since I haven't really working in anything of recent, it's not going to have it available in my jump list or for me to pin to the jump list. Let me go backstage here, and what you're seeing here is so old that it's not being listed because I've upgraded from Excel 2013 to Excel 2016 so I can do the training videos. And while we're here, notice that when I hover over one of these, you see this little push pin? This is the recents here, so when I open up other workbooks, the latest that I worked on is up at the top and it pushes the rest of these off the list. So if you always want it to be here, whether you've worked on it recently so it doesn't get bumped off over time, then go ahead and push it, and then notice how it says pinned. And it's pinned up here, so it doesn't matter if you worked on it 10 years ago, it'll always be there and not get bumped off the list with other workbooks that you've been working on recently. It does go down quite a ways, up to 2025. And then if you want to get rid of it so it can just bump off and not be pinned so it's always available there, go ahead and click on it, and if it wasn't a recent one, it'll automatically be removed, or if it was recent, then it'll just sit there until you open up other recent workbooks and it gets eventually bumped off. Finally, if you want to change the default font from Calibri size 11, so whatever cell you select, it's always going to be that, unless of course you come up here and you change it to something else like Absalom for that cell, but you go to another cell and you'll have to change it there as well. So if you have a font that you want as your default for every new workbook that you create for every cell within that workbook and on that worksheet, then go ahead and click on the File tab, go backstage, down to Options. General is selected by default. Just come down here to the section when creating new workbooks, and the default font is body font. Wait a second, it says Calibri here. The reason why it says body font is because that's a feature that's used for themes. So if you want to use themes, as we'll talk about in a later training video, it's probably best to leave it as body font because it's using the default font Calibri to be able to update your fonts. When you use a heading font and you've got a body font, it tries to use complementary fonts, so one's not so different than the other, so it doesn't blend well in your worksheet. So people look at that and go, wow, what a heading font. I can't really focus on the rest of the text within the body of the sheet because the body font is so different than the heading font. So it tries to find complementary fonts for headings and the body of the worksheet. And so if you're not interested in using themes, or better yet, you want to watch my themes training video before you decide, but it doesn't matter because you can always switch this back for new workbooks if you'd like, then click on the drop-down arrow and type in, well, I'm going to do Arial, so I'll type in ARIA, and there it is. Down at the bottom, I can go ahead and select it, and then the font size, we'll do 10, click OK. Then it says I have to close out of the workbook and open it back up for changes to take effect. OK, close out. Don't save it, double click to open it back up. So any cell that I'm in, there you go, Arial size 10. And to push my point home, like I said, you have to watch my themes training video, but let me click on the drop down arrow and scroll to the top, and notice how we have two different types of fonts. We have the regular fonts down below, and then you have the theme fonts. Now Calibri is the default theme font currently, that if we want to use the themes feature in our workbook on our worksheets, then we have to have it set to this. And you can see that for the body of the text, it has Calibri, and for the headings, Calibri Light. So something for the headings, if you choose to use a heading style for like a section of your worksheet to say, okay, this is for sales for the Northeast, that could be your heading. And then you want something for the body of it that has numbers, not so different fonts, so it's so jarring and it doesn't complement each other. So again, to use theme fonts, you got to use one that has body next to it and headings. And that's what body font was. It was using these as the theme fonts. So when I create a new workbook, the theme fonts feature is not going to work for me as far as the fonts go. And that can be found on the page layout tab, themes. And the elements that make up a theme are colors, fonts, and effects. And the one that we were talking about is fonts. That gets a little bit out of range right now, but at least it's something to think about. So when you watch the themes training video, you'll have a better idea of what I'm talking about. But for right now, to use the themes font at all, to say, okay, I want to change everything within my workbook with the heading that has Calibri Light, now Cambria, because what's on top is going to be for your heading font, your heading styles, and what's at the bottom is going to be for everything else that's not in a heading style. And notice how they're closely related. They're not too jarring. You don't have something that's so ridiculous up here that it takes your focus away, that you can't really focus on the rest of the font. That's not in heading style. In any case, it doesn't work here for me. I can select it, and I go back to the Home tab, and it's still Arial size 10 for that cell. Because if I had my workbook selected for the default every time I create a new one for the body font, then it would automatically come up here and choose the body here, Calibri. So when I come over here and click on the page layout and I want to update every cell that has that Calibri applied to it, the body font, then I can go ahead and click on fonts, and you can see Cambry and Calibri. If I choose, like, well, Corbel, select that, go back to the Home tab, there it is. Now it's Corbel. It updates everything within my worksheet. I don't have to go ahead and click and drag to select, well, as much as I can, or Control A to select the entire worksheet to change it, but it automatically updates it in one click. Now that's getting a bit deep here for starting level 1, but I'll refer back to this training video when you're like, hey, I can't use the theme fonts on the page layout tab. Why is it not working for fonts? Well, it's either one of two things. Either you got your default font to set to something that's not the body font every time you create a new workbook that selects, well, it's going to be Calibri to start with, or you've got a range of cells that you just went ahead and say, hey, don't use a theme font, use a regular font. But I digress. Let's stop it right here to keep it simple and show you how you can go ahead and change the default for your workbooks, the type of font and font size every time you create a new workbook. And mine's going to be Arial size 10. The Quick Access toolbar in the upper left-hand corner is called that because you can quickly access any command on it in a single click, as opposed to finding commands on the ribbon, which may require 2 clicks. Like if I'm on the Home tab and I need to access a command on the insert, there's 1 click, and then there's the second. So instead, stay on your favorite tab and add the more popular commands on the other tabs that you use frequently to the Quick Access toolbar. And you can do that one of a couple of ways. You can either click on its corresponding drop-down arrow and see a list of some of the more popular commands, and you can see the ones that are currently on the Quick Access toolbar. They have a check mark next to it. So if I deselect it, it removes it. Click on the drop-down arrow to check it, it adds it back in. Or click on the drop-down arrow to see more commands, opens up the Excel options window, and in that window you get the Quick Access toolbar selected, or you can access it by closing out and right-clicking anywhere on the Quick Access toolbar and going down to Customize Quick Access Toolbar. Opens up the same window, Excel options, with the Quick Access toolbar selected, or close out, go backstage, File, down to Options, again Excel options, and then just come down here and select Quick Access Toolbar, and there you go. So there's many ways to access the Excel options here, and then you can see we're divided into 2 windows. We've got the popular commands over here, and then everything that's currently listed on the Quick Access Toolbar over to the right. So if I want to be able to add some commands from the popular to the Quick Access toolbar, just go ahead and scroll through it, find one, select it, and then click Add. Or you can go ahead and double-click to add it, and if you don't like it, select it and click Remove. Now over here, these are the popular commands, but if you want all the commands that are available because you don't see yours here, then click on the drop-down arrow and go down to All Commands. Sorted numerically first and then alphabetically, so you can click and drag this and jump right to the P's. Like if you want to be able to insert a picture into your workbook, double click on it to add it over to the right, and there you go. Now when you click OK, you notice the order that picture will be at the end, right after font, which is right after the open folder. If you don't like that order, then select one and use the up and down arrows, so maybe the picture can be the first command, with it being on the top, being at the far most left of the Quick Access toolbar, to the bottom, which is to the right. Now, in addition to these commands, you have another that I want to show you. Scroll up to the top. It's called the separator. It's actually not a command that executes anything. It's just what it says. It separates your commands. If your commands are too close to one another and you find yourself clicking on one when you meant to click on the other because you're in a hurry and they're just so tight together, you can separate them or add these little lines or separators in between them to give you more space, and or you can use them for grouping, just like when you click and drag this down below. That you can see here that we've got this group. That line separates those commands for the clipboard from these commands from the font. So if you have a bunch of commands for the font up here that you added, like B for bold, I for italics up here, you can go ahead and add a line there that lets you know that this group is for a certain set of commands with another line for the next set of group for these commands. So it functions and or. Let's go ahead and take the separator here, double click, double click, add a few here, and then I can take the separator, move it down, so it's just, let's do it before the font, and then click OK and see what it looks like. There's the current font type, which you can see it here, but I added it up above. And there's the separator, the line, that separates or gives me a little bit of space in between the open folder command and the font type. And then you can see I get more space here. Or like I said, you can use it for grouping, saying, okay, in between these two lines, this whole group is for saving or opening a workbook. Another way to add commands to your quick access toolbar is to find the command on the ribbon, like B for bold, and right-click on it, and you can add it. Click Add to Quick Access, and there it is. You can also add whole groups, like for the entire font group. Just find a blank area in the font group and right-click and add it to the Quick Access toolbar. Now what you'll find is that when you add it, it chooses a command here to represent that group. So don't be fooled by looking at this going, oh, I just added this command, which is the font color, because when you click on it, it actually opens up the group. It just needs to choose a command, something to represent the entire group, and it happened to choose, or in this case it will always choose, the font color for the font group. So you can click on it to expand it and then execute whatever command you'd like. And then finally, to go ahead and remove all these commands from the Quick Access toolbar, probably the simplest way, if it's just a few, is to go ahead and right click on it and say remove, and let's get rid of these commands. Whoops, that one I have to right click probably on the arrow to remove it, and the separator, and these other separators, and the insert picture, and we're back to where we started. You can customize the ribbon, like if you want to add additional commands to any one of these tabs on the ribbon, or better yet, create your own custom tab and add commands to it. Just right-click anywhere on the ribbon and go down to Customize the Ribbon. Now on the left-hand side, you have a list of commands you can add over to the tabs on the ribbon. Well, it's popular commands. If you want to see all the commands that are available to add to the tabs on the ribbon, click on the drop-down arrow and go to All Commands. It's got it numerically and then alphabetically. And then over to the right, all the checkboxes that are checked are the tabs that are being displayed on the ribbon. And if you want to add one to it that's not checked, well, check it. And then to be able to add commands to, like, let's say the Home tab, notice that the Home tab has a minus sign. When you click on it, it collapses it, and you can see a plus, meaning that there's more to be shown. When you click on it, it shows you the rest. And what is it showing you? The groups. So the first group on the Home tab is the clipboard. You can see it there, clipboard, and then it goes font to font and so on. So top to bottom goes from left to right on the ribbon. Now you can't add commands to default groups. Well, let me show you. With it selected over here, when I click on 3D color and click add, it says you can't do it. It has to be a custom group. Okay. So to create a custom group on the Home tab, I just have to select anywhere on there, including any one of the groups, and then come down here and click New Group, so it adds it there. And then the default name is New Group, which doesn't work for me. So with it selected, I can come down here and click Rename, and then call it something spiffy, because everything we do is spiffy here at Dreamforce. And then you can add a symbol to it, meaning that, as you recall in the previous training video, when you right-click in a blank area of the group to add it to the Quick Access toolbar, there's got to be a symbol that represents it, so you can click on it to expand it to see it on the Quick Access toolbar. And that symbol is going to be a happy face. And then click OK, and there we go. We got our spiffy custom group. Now we can go ahead and add commands to it with it selected. And let's go back to the popular commands here. And then just go ahead and select a command and click Add, and add whatever you'd like to add to it. When you're done, that's it. Unless, of course, you want to be able to reorder this. So if the email is supposed to be the first command in this group, then with it selected, go up, up. Or better yet, if you want the group to be the first group on the Home tab, not the clipboard, then with it selected, go click up, up, up. And then one last thing before I go ahead and click OK and show you the work, let's add a new custom tab. So click on New Tab, and there it is. We got the name of the new tab. So let's go ahead and with it selected, click on Rename, Special Tab, and click OK. And then it added the default new group, so let's go ahead and rename that to whatever we want it to be. With it selected, click Rename. We can call that Format, then have a symbol to represent it, maybe like a butterfly. Oh, that's sweet. Click OK. And then add some commands to it, maybe like font size, color. Let's do that. And if you want, you can keep on adding additional groups, new group, and then rename. We'll do something generic like Group B, and then a symbol to represent it, like the paint bucket spilling over, click OK, and then add some commands to it. You get the idea. And by the way, this special is going to be the second tab on the ribbon because the Home tab is the first tab. So click Okie dokie and let's take a look at our work. So on the Home tab, remember we added the custom group and it's called Spiffy. So we got our commands here to cut, email, or delete sheet columns. And when I right click in a blank area of the group to add it to the quick access toolbar, our happy face represents it. So when I click on it, it shows me the group. Sweet. And then we have our special custom tab. Isn't that special? And we've got our two groups, Format and Group B. So when I right click to add it to the quick access toolbar, there's the paint bucket. Click on it to see the group. And then also, we weren't able to see the developer tab until we checked it, and now we can see it on the ribbon. Now let's go ahead and right click and go back to customize the ribbon. So in the process, let's say you made a lot of changes to it and you're like, oh, I made so many changes, what a mess. I wish I can get it back to the way it was without having to go through all the work. Well, you can by coming down here and clicking on the reset drop down arrow, and you get two options. You can reset only a selected ribbon tab, so if you got a selected ribbon tab that you made some customizations to it like the Home tab, with it selected, click on the drop down arrow and just do that tab. Or do all customizations. Now that includes not only everything on the ribbon, but also up here on the quick access toolbar. It's going to get rid of the paint bucket, the happy face, the open, and the save as. Well, that's horrifying. Oh well, it won't take me long to add a couple of commands to it then as opposed to resetting everything here. And before I do that, if you want to keep your tab but you don't want to see it, you can always uncheck it and then click OK and special is gone, right? But it's not gone completely because you can right click on it, go back to customize the ribbon, and then check it to have it reappear. So let's go ahead and click on reset and let's do reset all customizations, and it says delete all ribbon and quick access toolbar customizations. Yes. Click Okie dokie. And there you go. The happy face is no longer there, or the paint bucket, or the open folder, or the save as. The special tab's gone. The developer tab's gone, but the Acrobat is now showing because that was the default here. So if I want to get rid of that, right click. Again, you got customize the ribbon, uncheck, click Okie dokie, and we're back to where we started. And I just need to go ahead and add a few more commands like the save as, right click, customize the quick access toolbar, scroll down, save as, and open. Click Okie dokie. Now we're back to where we started. Another way to customize the ribbon is to actually hide it. So if you want more space vertically here, go ahead and come up here and click on the ribbon display options, and you can auto hide it. Right now it's showing the tabs and commands. You can also just show the tabs or completely hide it, and it's gone. Well, if you want to bring it back up, then just come up to the top until you can see a green bar shooting across. Click on it. Opens up temporarily so you can select a command on it. When you click on it or click off of it, it'll hide again. So to bring it back up, if you want to change to the ribbon display options, then go ahead and come up here, click on it, click on ribbon display. How about if we just show the tabs? Select that so you just get the tabs. That way if you need to access something on the data tab, well, you know where it's at. Click on it, opens it up temporarily. Go ahead and click on a command. When you click on it or click off of it, it collapses again. And then to bring it up completely so you see both the tabs and the commands, then just come up here, click on the ribbon display, and say you want tabs and commands. Or you can just go ahead and double click really fast on a tab, and does the auto hide so you just see the tabs. Double click on it really fast and it keeps it up even when you click off of it or click on another command. The most obvious way to navigate around a worksheet is you can use the mouse by clicking here, 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 or you can use the up, down, right, left arrow keys, or you can hit the tab key that goes to the right, or holding down the shift key and hitting the tab key goes to the left. You can also use the scroll bars, which are pretty big because I don't have any data within the worksheet here, so I can't get very far. If I had data that went down to row 100, then the scroll bar would be a lot shorter so I can click and drag and get to it faster as opposed to clicking on the drop down arrow and going row by row or column by column. And then when I want to get back to the first cell in the worksheet, which is cell A1, I can do it a couple of ways. I can either hold down the control key and hit home and I'm in cell A1, or let me click off, come up here in the name box and type in A1, hit enter, takes you to cell A1. Now you got control home. What about control end as an END? Well, if you have a data range that contains whatever data, like first name, last name, street address, and so on, and you've got a lot of clients there listed in that range. When you do Control End, it'll take you to the very last column and the very last row within that range. So to quickly get to the end of the data range, if it ends here, Control End. And then if our data range, again, is about yay big here, when you hover over any one of the borders of a selected cell and you double click really fast where you see the four-way arrow, it'll take you to the very top row of the data range, or if you do it to the left-hand side, to the very left column of the data range if it begins in column C, or to the right or to the bottom if you're in another cell within the range. And also when you hover over it, you get a four-way arrow. That means that when you click and you drag, you can move the contents of that cell into another cell. Speaking of other things that you'll see, besides the four-way arrow, when I move off of it, you get the white cross. That means that when you click and drag, you're in selection mode. So you can select a range of cells to either format it or change the alignment or to set the numbering for it. Or another way to select a bunch of cells is by clicking one, holding down the Control key and click here, 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 non-linearly. Or if you want to do it in blocks, for example, I got to select the range from A1 through H15, click in A1, then hold down the Shift key and get to where you can see in column H, row 15, Shift click, and it selects it in a block. And then click off. And when I hit the Home key, it takes me to the first column, whatever row I'm in. And if you're in a data range, again, we got our pretend like first name, last name, and we got our clients listed below. And I'm somewhere in it. If I hit the End key on the keyboard and hit the right arrow, it goes all the way to the end of the column, or the last column of that data range, or End and hit the down arrow, and it takes me to the very last row within the data range. If there's no data range there and I hit the End key and I hit right, it takes me all the way to the very last column in the spreadsheet, which is XFD, or End, and then the down arrow to the very last row. Hooey, that's a lot of rows. And then to get back to cell A1, Control Home takes me right there. And then if you want to move screen by screen, instead of using the down arrows for the scroll bar, so I want to go from the screen that I see here with so many rows, hit the page down, and it goes, instead of being in 1 to 24, now from 24 to, well, close to 48, hit page down again, and it goes from 47 to 70, or course page up. And if you want to go horizontal, then just hold down the Alt key and hit page down, and it goes over so many rows to row P, and then Alt, page up, scrolls over to the left. And if you have a lot of worksheets, well, we only got one. Let's click plus, 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 and plus. If I'm on worksheet 1 and I hold down the Control key and I hit page down, it takes me to worksheet 2, page down, worksheet 3, page up, sheet 2, page up, sheet 1. Again, Control page down or Control page up. And then also with your selection, you can go to a cell, hold down the Shift key and go arrow right. You can see it selects everything from that cell to the right, and with the Shift key still held down, I can hit the down arrow key and it selects everything from that point down. And then click off to deselect. Control A selects everything within the worksheet, not the other worksheets within the workbook. So if you want to quickly format everything so it's not Calibri, but it's going to be maybe Arial, then you can go ahead and change it to Arial. And so any cell that you select from here on out, if I come down, or just type in Arial, that's a lot faster. You can see it's pulled up here, or available for you selecting it down here, then any cell that I select is updated to Arial. Or you can come up here in between row header 1 and column header A, those two labels, and click on that cell in between. When you click on it, it's like hitting Control A, so it selects everything within the worksheet. And no worries, as we go through the other training videos, we'll use a lot of these examples that you can't see here because you don't have any data to work with, but it's to give you a heads up of what's coming. So to create a basic worksheet, well, just go ahead and find the cell and start entering in your data. Now the data could be for a mini database or a large one for that matter, or it can be to perform calculations and functions. And we'll do a combination of both, but we'll keep it very simple to start off. And you can start anywhere within the worksheet, but since we're already in the upper left-hand corner, how about if we start there? Better yet, cell A2, ooh, big jump. And let's go ahead and type in the labels that we want for our database. Like I want months. Hit the tab key and advances to the next column, but same row. Sales, tab key, expenses, tab, and then profits. Now when I'm done typing along that row, when I hit enter, it takes me back to the beginning column, which is column A. And the reason why that Excel does that is because it can see a pattern that you started with, which was in column A. So for example, if I start in column F and I type in 1, hit the tab key, 2, hit the tab key, and then I'm like, oh, let me click off, and then I'm like, oh, I need to go ahead and finish that pattern up by typing in 3, then hit the tab key, and then 4. When I hit enter, it's going to go to the next row, but under column H, because that pattern was reestablished when I, well, clicked off, but then I clicked back up here in the same row in column H. So when I hit enter, it doesn't go back to column F, but it starts off where I came back into the pattern from what we see to finish 1, 2, 3, 4. But from what Excel saw, you broke it when you clicked off. In any case, Excel does see a pattern. It does take a look at what you're doing to try to see if it can help out. And then to go ahead and delete this or get rid of 1, 2, 3, 4, just go ahead and with the white cross, you can see I'm moving my mouse around. There's the white cross, click and drag. Now, if you don't select everything that you want to delete by hitting the delete key, like let's say we selected these 3 cells and we're like, oh, wait a second, I need to include number 1, let me reselect. Make sure you get the white cross and you don't move it sloppily around, because if you do and you come back and you don't go all the way over to the white cross but kind of on the border of what you already have selected, you don't get the white cross, you get the 4-way arrow, which means you can move the data that's currently selected in 4 directions, up, down, left, or right. So if I click and drag and move it down, congratulations, we just learned something new in Excel, how we can move data by selecting it and clicking and dragging the border of the selection, and we move the entire contents of the selection. So let's go ahead and hit undo. So you're going to find out that you want to focus on the white cross. So let's go ahead and with the white cross, click and drag to select, and then hit the delete key on the keyboard and it's gone. Now below the months in that column, I've got my column labels for the data that I'm going to enter in below, but I also want some labels for the rows. Like for the months, what months are we going to have for our sales, expenses, and profits? Well, it's going to be January, hit enter, February, enter, and then March. Now notice that when I type in the letter M, Excel quickly looks up above and sees if there's something else that begins with the letter M, and it sees months. So it has ONTHS highlighted saying, look, to help you with your data entry, if you want the same label or the same text that's within the same column, just hit enter and it accepts it. If you're like, wait a second, that's supposed to be March, that's fine. Go ahead and select it by clicking on the cell, hitting the delete key, then typing in the letter M again to spell out March. But if you're like, wait, it's pulling up ONTHS again, just ignore it. Keep on typing ARCH to get in March. Hit enter. And the reason why Excel does that, again, it's for data entry help. If you've got to enter in the same thing in the same column, it checks as that column and looks to see if it begins with the letter M. Now when I type it in again, M, it's not bringing up months because it's conflicting with something else that has an A after it versus an O. So if I go to A, then it says, okay, we got something else that begins with MA as opposed to, hit the backspace key, MO. Then it looks up there and it says, oh, months. So again, to accept it, just hit enter and you don't have to finish typing to make your data entry more efficient and make it look like you're really super productive. I'm going to hit the escape key because when you do that in the middle of typing in something, it clears it out. So that way you don't have to hit enter and then go back and then click on the cell to select it and hit the delete key to get rid of the data or the contents within the cell. And then one row down, but in the same column, I want to get my totals, so I'll add the label for that. And now see if this makes sense. So I'm looking at my mini database. I've got my labels for the columns. I have my months, sales, expenses, and profits. And then for my rows, for the sales of January, February, and March, I also have expenses for those months and my profits, which will be a simple formula that we'll talk about in a later training video. Right now, I just want to show you how to create a simple database. And then for my totals, for all the sales, January through March, also all the expenses and the profits. Hopefully, we've got some. Now let me go ahead and finish entering in the data in the database, like our sales. 500, hit enter, and then 685, it goes down to the next cell in the same column. 195, hit enter, then come back up here for our expenses. And that's it. Congratulations, you just created a mini database. Now you're probably saying, hey, wait a second, we haven't done some calculations to get the totals for the sales and expenses, or also to calculate the profits. We're going to do that in a later training video, but right now it's just data entry and how to enter in your data. Now before we go any further, I recommend that we save our workbook. You can see up here on the title bar we got this generic name, Book 1. So as soon as we save it, it's going to ask us 2 questions if this is the first time we're saving it. Where do you want to save it, and what name do you want to give it? And right now it's not going to be Book 1, I can tell you that much. But let's go ahead and come over here and click on the File tab, go backstage, go down to Save As, And then you can save it to the OneDrive, which we haven't talked about, or to your computer here, your PC. It's selected there by default. Then over to the right, you got some folders on your computer that you can save it to, like the desktop or my documents, or you can go ahead and click Browse, find a place somewhere on your computer through the Save As window, or better yet, let me click Cancel and click back. I've added the command to the Quick Access Toolbar, the Save As, so I can click on that and I don't have to go backstage and go through all those clicks to save it to my computer. Automatically opens up the Save As window. So in the Save As window, I can navigate over here in the navigation pane to like my desktop, and on my desktop I want to save it to my exercises folder. Double click on that to open it up. So where do you want to save it, and what name do you want to give it? The name I want to give it is my Spiffy Ledger, because everything we do here is spiffy. And then go ahead and click Save, and there we go. Up in the title bar, you can see it's not Book 1, it's my Spiffy Ledger. So we were able to save it where? Into the exercises folder on the desktop, and what name? So we can identify this workbook. It's right there, my Spiffy Ledger. Now after you save it for the first time, it does a Save As, because you need to give it a name and a place to be saved so it knows where to go every time thereafter you make a change to the workbook. Like I change it from 5 to 4, hit Enter. Then I can just come up here and instead of doing Save As, just click Save, because it knows where to go, and where it goes is in the exercises folder on the desktop, and if there are other things in there, it says it's looking at the name of it, which is my Spiffy Ledger, the Excel file. So I can go ahead and go back to 5 and then click Save. It's not going to ask me those questions again. It's only the first time that you perform a save, it brings up the Save As. Now if you want to make a backup of your Excel workbook here, and when I talk about an Excel workbook, that's any Excel file that you save that has a worksheet in it. And guess what? You can't save an Excel file unless at least it has one worksheet in it. So it doesn't matter if you have 1, 2, 3 or more worksheets within a workbook. It's all referred to that file or this file or any file that you save as a workbook. So if I want to go ahead and make a backup of this because, I want to make changes to this and I want to make sure that I have my original as the backup in case if I make mistakes and I go too far here that I can't undo my mistakes, because once I save it and I close out of it, then I open it back up and I'm like, oh, I need to undo that. I can't remember what the previous numbers were. Because I closed out of the session and I reopened the workbook back up, I don't get the undo. It's only for that current session that you're working in. So to go ahead and save a copy of this, you want to do a Save As. Remember, it's going to ask us 2 questions. What name do you want to give it and where do you want to save it? So by following that same route again, we can choose a different name and save it in the same place. So we have 2 different workbooks with the same data, well currently as the same data, but different names. One will be my original, the other one will be the copy. So to do a Save As, again, I added it up here to the Quick Access Toolbar. There's the command Save As. Click on it. Opens up the Save As window. Where do you want to save it? Well, it defaults to my exercises folder on the desktop, and you can see the address here, desktop, the exercises folder. And so down here for the name, so I don't keep it as the same name, because if it is, and I click Save, it says, do you want to replace what you have in here with the same name that you have here? Well, if you want to do an overwrite, that's fine, but we'll say no. And instead, let me click at the end here, we'll just call it copy. So that way we can say, okay, that's my original and this is my copy. Click Save. And then notice back up here on the title bar, I'm now in the copy. It automatically closed me out of the original, my Spiffy Ledger, and now I'm in the copy. So any changes I make here is for the copy. So let's go ahead and close out of Excel. And speaking of which, of closing out of Excel, you can close out of the entire program, including the workbook that's currently in the program that you're working on, or you can just close out of the workbook. So to close out of just the workbook and leave the Excel program open, you can do it one of a couple of ways. You can either come up here, click on the File tab, and go down to Close, and notice the workbook is gone, but the shell of the program is still there. So I can go ahead with it open up the other workbook, and I can do that by coming up here on the Home tab, clicking on the Open folder, if you added that command to your Quick Access Toolbar. So it opens the Open window. So I can look inside the Exercises folder on my desktop, and hey, there's my copy and there's my original. And then of course you can go ahead and open up the original with a double click. And then the other way to close out of this, if you don't want to do File to close, you can also do the shortcut keys Control W, and it closes out of the workbook that you're in, but leaves the program open. And then of course if you want to close out of the program, well then go ahead in the upper right hand corner, click on that X, and it closes the program. And also if you had any worksheets or workbooks opened, it'll close out of that as well, because when you close the program, you can't work on your workbooks. And then I go to my Exercises folder on the desktop, double click to open up the folder. There they are. Or, let me close out of that. If you added the shortcut to the program down to your taskbar, you can right-click on it and it opens up a jump list of the most recent workbooks that you worked on. And there you go, you've got a couple of them. And it just shows the most recent, so if you have like 300 different workbooks that you worked on throughout the day, it's only going to show like top 5 or top 10, however you want to customize this. Of course, you can watch the Windows training video on that. But if you want it to stay up there so it doesn't roll off because it's not one of the recent ones, but you always want it to be there, whether it's not the most recent workbook that you worked on, you get this little push pin. So if you always want My Spiffy Ledger there and not rolled off if there's other workbooks that you're working on because that's not the most recent, then go ahead and select it and it pins it and it pushes it up above this line, recent, and everything below is going to be recent. And if you want to get rid of it, so that way if you haven't worked on it for a while, you unpin it, it's going to roll off. You won't see it down below in the recent. But because it's recent, as we just saw, we were working on it, it's going to be there. So I can go ahead in that jump list, click on what's recent, opens it up, or if you don't want to use the jump list, you can come back here, click on the File tab to go backstage, and then go down to Open. And of course, you can go ahead and browse on your computer to find it, or over here on the right hand side, you get a list of what's recent today and those that I worked that are way old, way back in March here. And then you also get the option over to the right, as I discussed in an earlier training video, the little push pin. So not only in the jump list down below with a right click, but you can also come up here and say when I go to Open, let me go ahead and include Import Contacts, because as I start working on more workbooks, different workbooks than what I have here, this is going to roll off eventually and I won't see it. But if I want to work on this later on, then I can go ahead and select the push pin and it puts it right up at the top and it says everything in this section has been pinned. And you can see the pin is down as opposed to pointing to the left. So that will always stay there no matter how many different workbooks I work on. Everything else gets rolled off if it's not the most recent one. Otherwise, if I don't want it to be pinned anymore so it does roll off if I haven't used it recently, then click on the pin to unpin it. And notice how it's not in today because I haven't worked on it today and it goes back down below. In fact, if it's old enough, it'll go back down below or completely roll off if it's been really old. If somebody sends you an Excel workbook that was created in an earlier version of Excel, like 2010 or even as early as 97, wow, that takes me back, then you may want to convert it to the latest version, which is the current version that you have installed on your computer, like mine Excel 2016. Why? Because if it's really early, you're going to have less stabilization, so your Excel workbook may close out, collapse, or become corrupted. Also, you have what's called zip compression in the latest versions of Excel that makes the file size a lot smaller than those earlier versions. And I've got an example here. It's in my exercises folder on the desktop. Double-click to open it up. And there are at least 3 ways that I want to go over that you can identify if an Excel workbook was created in an earlier version before you even open up the Excel file. And you can see which one of these is not like the other. Well, first off is the image, the icon. That X is old and outdated. And if you didn't know better, that was, well, the version of 2000, 2003, whereas opposed to these ones, when I hover over it, you can see in the pop-up the type is Microsoft Excel. But when I go back to this one, in the pop-up, it says it was Microsoft Excel 97 through 2003. And that includes 97, 2000, 2002, and 2003. You can't tell what version, but at this point it doesn't matter. It's just not compatible with the latest versions, so it doesn't get tagged with this latest version icon here to let you know that that is not part of Excel 2016. And the other way that you can identify it is by looking at the extension. Now you have the name of the workbook. This one's called Convert. And then you have a dot. Whatever comes after the dot is the extension. It's 3 or 4 letters. Now if you can't see the extensions on your computer, well, you can watch my Windows training video on extensions because you want to be careful when you're playing with extensions so you don't turn the file into something that you don't want it to be, so it opens up in another program that gives you a bunch of gobbledygook and you're like, what the fudge is this? In any case, you can see XLS, that's for earlier versions. The latest version, XLSX, that added X, is the XML or extensible markup language that makes these files more stable and of a smaller size than if they were created in an earlier version. So to go ahead and convert this to the latest version, open it up with a double click. And you can see up on the top, on the title bar, it says it's in compatibility mode. That's another identifier that it was created in an earlier version to make it compatible with the latest version of Excel 2016. So to convert it, come over here and click on the File tab, go backstage, Info selected by default, and there you go. Compatibility mode. Some new features are disabled to prevent problems when working with previous versions of Office. Converting this file will enable these features, but may result in layout changes. So you may have to work with the layout if you got something old and it doesn't quite convert the way that we hoped. In any case, to go ahead and convert it, click on Convert. And it says this action converts the workbook to the current file format, which allows you to use all of the new features of Excel, in this case Excel 2016, and it reduces the file size. Hey, smaller size, great. The original workbook will be deleted and cannot be restored after this conversion. Uh-oh. Okay, are we good with that? Yeah, click Okie dokie. And then it says the conversion has been completed. To use the new and enhanced features of the current file format, you have to close out and reopen the workbook. Do you want to do it for us? Yes. So when I click yes, notice up here in the title bar it goes from compatibility mode to, yes, reopens it, convert, and it added the extra X. So now we know it's extensible markup language and in the latest version. Cool. So when I go ahead and close out of the program and I look back here, there's the extra X, there's the icon. When I hover over it, it doesn't tell me that that was created in an earlier version from 97 through 2003. What you're looking at here is a mini database that I want to look at it graphically and not numerically, so I applied the data bar feature to it. So the data bar that's the smallest is the cell that contains the smallest number within that range. Pretty cool. Now the problem with this is that if I try to send this to somebody who has an earlier version of Excel, like maybe 97, some of these fancy features may not work. And the way that you can find out for compatibility purposes is you can come up here, click on the File tab and go backstage. Info is selected by default, so just come down here, check for issues, click on the drop-down arrow, and there it is, Compatibility Checker. Check for features not supported by earlier versions of Excel. Click on it, and if it finds any issues with earlier versions, they're listed here. You can see the heading here, Significant Loss of Functionality. Ooh, I wonder which version can't handle it. And it's Excel 97 through 2003. It lets you know that it can't handle conditional formatting like data bars, color scales, or icon sets. And it tells you the location that it found the problem on, which is nice because sheet 1 out of 3 sheets, if I got a lot of data, I can go to sheet 1 and try to fix it by removing the data bars if I don't want those who have an earlier version of Excel to run into problems. Let's go ahead and scroll down, and it has another issue. Talks about uses a negative value setting for the data bars, and so it's not going to be supported, again, 97 through 2003, and also 2007. And again, it's on sheet 1. Scroll down, and then for minor loss of fidelity, you're looking at, in quotes, the bar direction. Okay, it's going left to right, so apparently it can't handle it in 97 through 2003, or it's got some sort of minor issue with it. And also 2007, again, it's looking at sheet 1. So 97 through 2003 will have the biggest issue, 2007 kind of an issue, or not as many as 97 through 2003. Now, if you see a lot of issues with this, and you want to narrow it down to like maybe 2010 to see if there are any issues because you want to send it to somebody who has Excel 2010 on their computer, then you can click on the drop-down arrow and choose your version. So you'd uncheck all the other versions by selecting them and going to 2010, and you can see that only 2010 is checked, and down below there's nothing. So when you send this off to that other person who has 2010 installed on their computer, they should be fine. So what you can do is you can go ahead and click OK and say, well, it doesn't matter, I'm going to send it to that person anyways. I don't care if they can't see it. Hopefully they can view the numbers. But unless you know for sure you're taking a gamble and you don't want to have to go ahead and shovel the same dirt twice by them coming back to you saying, what's this about? I can't read it. In any case, you may want to go ahead and fix the issues so they can read it. They may not be able to view your fancy data bars, so to get rid of it, just go ahead and select the range and unformat it. But we'll go ahead and leave it there because I want to show you what happens when you convert it to an earlier version and then open it back up in Excel 2016 to see how it tries to choke it down. Excel 2016 can handle it because it recognizes data bars, but if the person had 2003 or earlier, it's going to be a lot worse than what we're going to see here. So to go ahead and convert it to an earlier version without making changes to it and removing the data bars, but just hoping for the best that the person won't have major issues, then come up here, let's go ahead and click on Save As. Because you want to save the type from the default Excel workbook, Excel SX, click on it, and to 97 through 2003. Now Excel only gives you those two options. Either you can do it to 97 through 2003 or the latest version, whatever version you currently have installed in your computer. It won't tell you that it's 2007, 2010, or 2013, or even 2016, because all of them have the same extension, the extra X, which is extensible markup language, a more stable file. But even so, like we saw in 2007, it's got some issues. So we'll go ahead and, for the sake of the training video, convert it to the earliest version that is available here that allows us to. And it's going to be in the exercises folder on the desktop. And there's the version. Go ahead and click Save. And then it brings up the compatibility checker before we actually save it as a warning saying, hey, we got some issues here. You realize this? And if I'm like, yeah, and I click Cancel, it won't save it into an earlier version. But if I click Continue and ignore it, then let me go ahead and close out. Open up the exercises folder on my desktop, because in there we had our original compatibility checker file and then the conversion of it to that earlier version. And as we talked about in an earlier training video, which one of these is not like the other? Well, you've got an earlier version icon letting you know that it's not the same as the latest version 2016. And when you hover over it, you can see in the pop-up that that's the data type Excel 97 through 2003, and also the extension down below XLS, as opposed to the latest XLSX, the extensible markup language, the extra X there that makes it more stable, that file, as opposed to this one. And again, you can watch my Windows training video on extensions if you want to know more about what comes after the dot, after the name that you give the file here, and how to view it or hide it, or any issues that you may run into it, because that tells the computer which program to open this file up in. So if you don't have an extension, or you try to open up a file and it goes, I can't find it, this is one of the things you may want to look into. In any case, I'll leave that to my Windows training videos on extensions. And then go ahead and double click to open it up, this earlier version. And let's see how Excel 2016 handles it. Well, it handles it, but the data bars aren't as crisp and as clear and as defined as what we had in the original version of the workbook. It's kind of fuzzy. It still shows because Excel 2016 recognizes it as its own, even though it's been changed a bit to make it compatible. As you can see up on the title bar, it's in compatibility mode. Close out, open up the original, and you can see, let me click off the crispness of that without trying to convert it to an earlier version where those earlier versions of Excel can handle it, if at all. Now, if you need more help with Excel than what we cover in our training videos, you want to learn more about another feature, you can come up here on top of the ribbon to the Tell Me What You Want to Do feature, which is new to Excel 2016, as opposed to the little question mark in earlier versions that you can click on to get help. So go ahead and click in here, and you get a little pop-up that says, hey, this is what you recently did and some things you may want to try. If it's not there, then go ahead and type in a keyword, like let's say I want to learn about the comment feature, how to insert a comment into a cell here, and does it actually replace the data within the cell. So let's go ahead and type in the keyword comment, and you get 3 different options. Now I know there's more, but I'm talking about the category of the options. Like everything up above this line here are all commands. So you can actually insert a comment, show all comments just by clicking on it if there are any comments that are inserted in the workbook. Show ink annotations, find and select, clear. You can get help on it or do a smart lookup. Now if you do the smart lookup, it opens up the task pane over to the right. And when you first do it, Excel is going to ask you, hey, in order to do this, to search our database online, we've got some privacy things that you may want to consider. So you can click on the privacy policy link. And if you accept it, then go ahead and click on the button Got It. And then it'll go ahead and do a lookup, and in the Insights task pane, you can explore it and actually define it. Now explore it down below. It doesn't say anything about comments in Excel, about the feature of it. It just tells you that it's a noun. So if you're actually trying to define it, which also it has the define option, because when you click on that, it's the same thing as when you click on explore. Exploring is trying to explore all different options throughout the web, as opposed to specifically defining it. And so, well, you get the definition here, the noun, a verbal or written remark expressing an opinion or reaction, and you can go down and do more explore, like on Wikipedia, do a web search on comment definitions. Sometimes they'll have images depending upon what you type in, if the search engine can find something that it finds helpful. And then, like I said, you can define it if you want the definition of it, but it doesn't say anything about the comment feature. So if you want to actually look up a word and see what it means, define it, or explore what that is on the web, you got the Insights task pane. Let's go ahead and close out. Come back up here, and let's type in comment again. Besides the commands, next we have Get Help on it. That's what I need. Click on Get Help, opens up the Help window, and down below Add a Comment. And you can go ahead and click on it, and it tells you about adding notes to individual cells by using comments to give your reader additional context for the data that it contains. So it looks like it just adds a little pop-up sticky note over to the right-hand side that people can read more about the contents or the purpose of the cell, which is cells are up. That's great. 42 is greater than 14, 21, so sales are up. And then you can come up here if you want to do a search, type in about keyboard shortcuts, and it actually pulls it up, so you can just go ahead and click on it. And then keyboard shortcuts in Excel 2016 for Windows. And then you can go back to your original search, add a comment, you can go home. So that way you can get the top categories that people look at. And that's pretty much it for the help. Close out. And then like I said, the other option under the 3 categories that are listed when you type in what you want to search for are the actual commands. So like inserting a comment, when I click on it, it actually inserts the comment as you just saw in that window. The help window explaining what it does. And so there's the pop-up. You type in sales are up, or there's no sales this quarter because we added it to an empty cell. In any case, you can learn more about comments, but the purpose again of it is to use the tell me what you want feature to either execute the command, define it, to get more help in Excel on what that feature does and how to execute it, and also if you just want a generic definition of what you typed in here to do a lookup, there you go. Oh, and there's one other place that you can go besides tell me what you want to do when you want to do a smart lookup to get the definition, well, the Insights task pane. Let me go ahead and hit escape a couple of times. So, well, let me click off. The comment's still there, so I can right click on the cell, and in the shortcut, delete the comment. Don't worry, we'll cover this later. And if you come up here and click on the Review tab, in the Insights group, there's a Smart Lookup, so you don't have to come up in here and click in it to type it in. If you want to just click on Smart Lookup, it looks in the cell, and if there's anything in there, it'll do a search on it. But it says, looks like you didn't select any text, so if I select California, do a Smart Lookup, it looks it up, and hey, isn't that fun? I can explore California. May have nothing to do with my spreadsheet at the moment, except that that's where we had sales. And then also you can actually define it and see what the definition. It's a state in the western US. Okay, I'm good. What you're looking at here is a small database of camping gear sales in the US, and I want to keep track of it by the first 4 months of 2016. So I've got their column labels January through April, but I also want to keep track of it by employee, or the employee's ID. So I've got their row labels, and you can see that I got a cross-tab thing going on here. So at this intersection, I've got the column label January, but the label for that row is this employee ID. So that's his sales for the month of January. Then when I advance in the same column down to the next row, it's the next employee for the same month. Now let's go ahead and go down next to this label. I just typed it in. So you can tell that we want to get the month total for January, and then we'll do it for February and so on. So to create a basic formula to add up all the cells within the month of January, go ahead and hit the equals key on the keyboard to let Excel know that we're going to enter in a formula. Then go ahead and type in the cell reference that we want to add up with the next one and the next one and so on. So this first cell that we want to add into the formula is going to be in column C, row 7. So the name of the cell or the cell reference is C7. And notice that when I type it in, it actually selects the cell so I can look at it graphically and go, okay, that's what I wanted to add. And then to add the next cell, go ahead and hit the plus key on the keyboard, and the next one in the same column, which is still column C, is going to be the next row 8, so C8. And also, not only does it highlight it, but it does it in a different color so you can compare and contrast between exactly which part of the formula refers to what cell. And then let's go to the next one, plus, and then let's do C10. And you're like, oh, wait a second, I missed it. Well, let's just go ahead and accept the formula by hitting the Enter key on the keyboard and say when you made a mistake, if you need to make changes to it, you can do it one of a couple of ways. Go ahead and select the cell and notice that it just shows us the value or the result of the formula, not the actual formula. To see the formula, you can look up here in the formula bar, and you can make your changes up here. So click after C8 and then do plus C9 and hit Enter. And notice before I hit Enter, I was typing all in lowercase. That will save you some time. Don't use the Shift key because it'll automatically convert the letters of the columns into uppercase. So when I hit Enter and I go back to select it, it converted the lowercase c to uppercase, so save yourself some time. Now you can edit it up here and do it that way, and when I click in there, it goes into edit mode, or to get out of edit mode, hit the escape key on the keyboard, and then you don't have to mess with it. But you can go ahead and double click on the cell really fast, and it puts you into edit mode within the cell as opposed to the formula bar. So if I come in here and I start messing around and typing in a bunch of stuff, and I'm like, oops, I made a mistake, and you don't want to accept it, to get out of it and not to accept your changes, hit the escape key on the keyboard. and it leaves it untouched. As you can see up here in the formula bar, it's the same formula. Now when I double click and I make changes and I'm done and I hit enter, it accepts it and it moves it down to the next cell, right? Or when you double click in it, if you want to accept it but stay in the same cell without moving, then you can come up here on the formula bar and click on enter. Of course you get the X, which means to cancel, which is also hitting the escape key. So click on enter and it doesn't move it out of there, so you can stay in the same cell and look up here and not have to go back and reselect the same cell to check your formula by looking up into the formula bar. Now, is this the actual correct sum for the entire range here? You can get out a calculator, I suppose, or you can do a check in Excel by clicking and dragging and selecting the range. Now remember, to select a range, you got to have the white cross. So you can see the white cross, which is going to be there, basically, until after you select the range, and you're like, oops, I didn't mean to select that range, and you hurry and go over to the edge of the selection. You don't get the white cross, you get a four-way arrow. We already talked about that a little bit. We'll talk about that more later. Or you go to the bottom right-hand corner and you get a black cross. We'll talk about that later. So you got three things you're concerned about that you don't want to see, at least two of them right now when you're selecting a range. Not the black cross, the four-way arrow, but just the white cross. So click and drag to select it, and then notice down below on the status bar, it gives you some stats of what you have selected on your spreadsheet. You get the average of the range of cells, so the average cells for that range is 21,000, and then the total count of the cells you have selected is 4, and hey, the sum or the total there, 867, 867, it checks out. Now remember, as we talked about in an earlier training video, you can customize the status bar by right-clicking on it and saying that you don't want to see the sum, and click off, you can see the sum's gone. So let's right-click on it and add the sum. You can add others like minimum and maximum. We'll learn those in a later training video. Let me go ahead and click off. And so that's one way, or the basic way, to, in this case, add up a range of cells. Now a shortcut to that, at least I think it's a shortcut, let's go to the next month for February and add up the same range by hitting the equals key on the keyboard and selecting the first cell, hitting the plus key, second cell, plus, third, plus, fourth, then hit enter. Clicking and hitting the plus key is a lot faster than typing it in, at least I think so. And we get the total for the month of February. And then another shortcut on top of that is that if you already have the function entered in, as we do for the first column, you can actually copy that function or formula and paste it. Now when you copy and paste it, are you copying the value or the actual formula? Good question, but I kind of gave it away. When you go ahead and select it and you want to copy it, you can do the shortcut keys on the keyboard, Control-C, or just come up here on the Home tab to the Clipboard group and click on the Copy button. When you click on it, notice that the cell you have selected starts moving and coming alive. It look like marching ants, where they're just marching around saying, hey, this cell is hot, it's active, this is the one that you want to copy from, so go ahead and select a destination. In fact, you can see down below in the status bar, select, whoops, let me get out of the way. Select destination and press enter or choose paste. So now that we've got the cell that we want to copy, go ahead and choose the cell that we want to paste it in. And to paste it, you can either do Control-V as in Victor to paste, or come up here on the Home tab to the Clipboard group and click Paste. And when you do that, you get a little smart tag that you can click on, and you get different paste options. The default paste is right there, and the default paste is going to actually paste the formula, not the value. Because if it pastes the value of 867, then you'd see 867, but you don't see that, do you? In fact, in the cell, if you look up in the formula bar, what formula do you get? Do you get column C, C7, C8? No, you get column E, E7, E8, and so on. So hey, that's really cool. How did it know how to do that? Let me go ahead and click off, and to get rid of the marching ants, hit the escape key on the keyboard so it can stop that, unless of course you want to keep pasting that same cell to other cells, which we could have done for April, but I've got one more trick up my sleeve that I want to show you. But the reason why it knows that is because it's dynamic. It's relative. It's not an absolute that when I copy this cell, it has to always stay in that range. And we'll talk about absolute references in another training video. So it takes it and it says, fine, you paste the formula over here. I'm automatically going to update because I see a pattern that you've got the same range of cells. In other words, I don't have a number up here for March and a number down here for March and a number over here for March. There's just no structure to it or organization, so it would try to go all over the place. So it's important to create your database as concisely as you can and tight and organized, because if it looks organized to you, most likely Excel is going to be able to help you out as it did with our copy and paste. And I'll talk about the errors of creating a database in a later training video to look out for. So Excel can help you figure it out and not have to do the extra work that would be unnecessary when it comes to working with the data and using certain features in Excel. So we did the simple formula where we typed it in, and then we used the mouse to go ahead and select the cells, and then we went ahead and copy and pasted it. Then the last thing I want to show you is that you can go ahead and use what's called the autofill handle. So if you have a cell adjacent, you want to copy and paste that formula over to the right-hand side, as in this example. Then in the lower right-hand corner of the cell that you have selected, hover over it until it turns from a white cross to a black cross. That's what's known as the autofill handle, and one of its functions, or the main function of it, is that when you click on the black cross and drag, it actually will copy the contents of that cell, not the values, but in this case the function, and paste it over to the next adjacent cell. It's like a copy and paste. You just click and drag and there you go. And did it update correctly? With the cell selected, look up here in the formula bar, and it's not E7, E8, which is this column. It updated to F7, F8. Very cool. And you can see with the Smart tag, when you click on it, the fill options, where it copies the cells, or you can copy the cell and fill only the formatting, or fill it without the formatting. So in other words, if you had a blue fill, bold numbers, underline, italics, and you clicked and dragged it over, you can say, don't copy the contents, I just like the formatting. So if I had it here, and I made the color red, and I took the autofill handle and I clicked and dragged it over here, it copied everything over. But what if I want to click on the drop-down autofill handle and just say fill without formatting? So it doesn't bring over the formatting of the adjacent cell. Anyways, I digress because this autofill handle will cover in depth in a later training video. But there's the 4 options when it comes to helping you by starting with the basic formula and some of the shortcuts once you've created your first basic formula. Now let's go ahead and continue with basic formulas, this time with the twist. We'll do it for the average and get the average for each month. So next to label month average, let's hit the equals key on the keyboard. And we can do it one of a few ways. Like if you want to take the month total and get the average for the 4 employees, then go ahead and select the cell, or you can type it in, C12. And then we want to divide that by the total number who contributed to that total. And the total number are 4 employees. So to divide it by 4, you want to use the /. And on the keyboard, that's the one that's left of the shift key. It's the one that has the question mark on it. Just don't hold down the shift key, otherwise you get the question mark. So that's your /. And then type in 4, hit enter, and there you go. You got the average. You want to confirm it? Go ahead and select it and come down below on the status bar, and we got 21, 21. Hey, it works out. You can do it that way, or let's go to the next cell and do the average this way and type in equals. And let's go ahead and click on the first cell, and let's say we don't have the total for the entire month of February, so we have to add them all up first. So equals D7, then plus the next cell, plus the next cell, plus the next cell. And then we want to, what, divide it by 4. So we do the /, type in 4. Oh, wait a second, there's something wrong with this formula. Because what it's going to do is it's going to add up the first 3, then the last one, it'll add it up after it divides it. If you remember your algebra days, when you start putting in functions and formulas, it does multiplication and division first before it does the addition. So we want to do what's called order of operation, where we tell it what we want it to do first, and then what we want it to do second, and so on. So what we want it to do first is to add everything up. Then once it's all added with the total, as you see here, but down in this formula, then we want to divide it by 4. So the order of operation we'll do is by the parentheses, by adding 1 at the beginning and then 1 at the end before it divides it by 4. So the first order of operation is what's in the parentheses first. Then after it's done adding, then it goes outside of it and it says, oh, there's something that has to be divided by 4. So hit the enter key on the keyboard, and does it work? Let's go ahead and check. Click and drag. Do we get 1, 2, 4? Hey, there it is, 1, 2, 4. It works. And then of course, if you want to not type it all in again, you've got adjacent columns that you want to enter in the same formula, then go ahead and hover over the lower right hand corner, get the black cross or the autofill handle, click and drag, and it copies over the formula, not the value or the result of the previous formula. Let's see if it does that. Select the cell, and up here does it say D7, D8? No, it's the next column, E, so that worked. Or like I said in the previous training video, you can copy and paste as well. Copy the formula and paste it. And Excel can figure that out because we got a clean database. when we go from one cell to the next, it sees it as relative, so it automatically updates from one column to the next. In fact, let's just go ahead and do Control-C, select the cell, Control-V as in Victor to paste it, hit the Escape key to get rid of the marching ants. With the cell selected, you can see it updated to the next column, the F's and not the E's. Now, in order to perform a calculation, you don't have to have pre-filled cells with numbers. You can actually just do it from scratch in one cell. For example, if I select an empty cell and I'm like, okay, what's 199 minus 1? Type in equals 199 minus 1, hit enter, and there you go. I didn't have to select any other cells, I just did it all in one cell. With the cell selected, you can see the formula up in the formula bar, or you can double click to edit within the cell, and then hit enter. Also equals 25. Now for multiplying, hit the asterisk key on the keyboard. Let's do 4, hit enter, it's 100. Oh, and then one last thing that I want to show you, now that we have data to work with, we've got a database that if I want to zip from one side to the other, I know it's small, but you can imagine if I had all the way over to column AA and I want to quickly get over there, I don't want to click and drag the scroll bar and scroll, but instead, go ahead and click anywhere within the database. If you want to get to the furthest column on the right, then with the selection of that cell, hover over the border until you can see a four-way arrow, double click really fast, and it goes to the furthest column in the database. And you can double click on the bottom, takes you to the bottom of it, double click on the left, and of course the top, it takes you to the top. As you recall in the previous training video, we learned how to create a basic formula to add up a range of cells, or even averaging the range of cells. Here I want to do something that's a bit more complex, but a lot quicker when it comes to summing up a range or averaging a range by using what are called functions, the sum function and the average function. But before I do that, when you look at a range of cells and you want to find out which cells contain functions or formulas, for my spreadsheet I could use common sense and go, okay, the number that I have down below here should contain a function or formula that gives me the results. The only way to really find out that if it is a result of some function or formula is to select it and look up here in the formula bar and go, oh, okay, there's the formula or function. But when you click off and you need to take a look to see if all the cells contain the functions and formulas that are adding it up and somebody just didn't type in a number, one way that might be quicker than selecting every cell is to come up here and click on the Formulas tab on the ribbon, go to the Formula Auditing group, and it's that command right there. When I hover over it, you can see in the pop-up it says Show Formulas, and then there's the shortcut key Control apostrophe, and it says it'll display the formula in each cell instead of the resulting value. Go ahead and click on it, and it pushes open and displays all the cells that contain the functions or formulas. Why would you want to do that? Well, again, if you want to be able to spot those cells and make sure that they have the function or formula in it and be able to do a quick review of the formula without selecting each one to make sure it's consistent. Like this should be for the column C, so there's C's, and that for column D and E, and that makes sense. You can also select it, and it looks like it's in edit mode because it highlights the cells that this formula is dependent upon. So that's pretty cool to be able to spot quickly without having to double click to get inside of it to see the colors. And then also know that what you see here when you print will actually come out on the printer. So if you don't want to see the formulas when you print the worksheet off, then you need to go back to hiding them. So to hide them, just come back up here and deselect it, or use the shortcut keys Control apostrophe, and they're gone. Now let's go ahead and add up a range here for this employee, the total sales that they made from January through April. And instead of using a simple formula, we're going to use functions. And one way that you can enter in a function is by simply typing it in, equals, and of course you'll need to know the name of the function. So when we want to add up a range of cells, the name for that function is sum, so just like it sounds, S. And the moment I type in the first letter, it lists all the functions, and you'll notice that to the left of each name, you got the FX, F, that's the symbol for function. Just think of F for function. And then I'm looking for sum, so I can either scroll down or use the up or down arrow keys to toggle around, or just keep typing it until you get the process of elimination by typing in more until I finally get to the word sum, and there it is, sum. And you can see to the right, you get the pop-up that gives you a synopsis that says it's going to add up all the numbers in a range of cells. Cool. To go ahead and select the function, you can do it one of a couple of ways. You can either double click on it and it pops open the syntax for you to go ahead and enter in, well, it says number 1, but in our case it's going to be the first range, and it can be the only range, or if you have additional ranges that you want to add up, you can go ahead and type in comma and select another range. You can do it that way, or let me hit the escape key, you can type in equals SUM, And with it highlighted, just hit the Tab key and it pops open the syntax as well. So the range that we want to select with the cursor flashing here is to go ahead and select the range for the first employee, their ID, and it's going to be C7 through F7. And notice over here in the function, you have the first cell, which is C7, and the last cell. The colon means through. So C7 through F7, everything in between those two cells, including those cells. Then all you have to do is go ahead and hit enter, and there you go. Does it check out? Well, let's go ahead and click and drag to select the range of cells and go down and see if we get the total sum, 705, 705. It checks out. Now, if you made a mistake and you want to go ahead and edit it, just double click in it, as we talked about in the previous training video, except I want to add something more. You can also move the entire range by hovering over one of the borders until you can see a four-way arrow that when you click on the border, that means you can drag it in any four directions. So if you want to move it around, say, okay, that's my range. Okay, that doesn't make sense, but nonetheless, you can move it around if you want to include a different range. Or you can actually hover over one of the corner boxes called resizing handles. It's called that because when you click and drag, it'll resize the selected range. And so when you can see arrows pointing in opposite directions, you're hovering over the resizing handle. You can then click and drag and go up, in, out, down, and broaden your selection or reduce it. And if you don't want to accept the changes that you made, like I don't, hit the escape key and it goes back to the default when I double click what I originally had selected. And then hit the escape key to get back out of that edit mode. Now notice that when I have the cell selected, it's got a little, let me click off of it, it's got a little green triangle in the upper left hand corner. And then when I select it, it gives me that little exclamation point, that tag. When you hover over it, it's giving you a warning, that green icon's to let you know something's going on. So when you select it, then it gives you a little tag that you can hover that gives you more information, a synopsis of what the issue is. And it says the formula in the cell refers to a range that has additional numbers adjacent to it. So the range it's referring to is this range, and it's saying it's got additional numbers around the range. Well, it's got one to the left, and it's saying basically we didn't include it. So it's questioning our judgment and saying, I'm not sure you included everything that you should have. Well, guess what? I did. So what you can do is go ahead and click back in the cell to get the tag, then click on the tag, and you can see it's highlighted there, even a shorter synopsis, formula omits adjacent cell. And you can say, you know what, I want to ignore you because that's not true. I got what I want. Oh, rats. How do I go back to ignoring those errors? Well, come up here and click on the File tab, go backstage down to Options, and then select the Formula tab and come down here, and there it is, Error Checking. And you can see by default it's going to enable background error checking, and the color that indicate that there are errors is green. You can change it and choose another color. And then finally, if you want to go back to those errors that you ignored, then go ahead and click on Reset Ignored Errors. Click on it. And before I click OK, while we're here, let me come up here and show you about the calculation options. By default, yours should be done automatically. In other words, let me click and drag the title bar so I can move the window out of here. That when you have a bunch of cells that this formula is dependent upon, when you change this and you type in like 1, they only made $1 for January, it should recalculate this automatically and reduce it to a smaller number. That's the default. But if you choose manual and you check the box recalculate workbook before saving, that means that when you make a bunch of changes in all these cells that these formulas are dependent upon, it won't automatically update until you actually click save. So that way you can get the numbers that you want in place and still keep focus of what the value used to be without it actually updating until you click save. In any case, that's up to you. Let me go change this back to automatic as I want it to be. And we clicked on Reset Ignored Errors. So when I click OK, I should get the green triangle back. So when I select it, it gives me the pop-up, and then I can go ahead and ignore it again. And then finally, instead of just actually selecting a range, you can just simply type it in like equals SUM. And instead of hitting the Tab key to accept the function, just if you know how to type it, just do open parentheses and then type in your range, and that would be C8 colon means through, and then to the last column, which would be F, but the same row, 8, and there you go, just hit enter. Now why would you want to type it in as opposed to typing in the first part and then clicking and dragging to select the range? Well, it makes sense to click and drag to select the range because it's so small, but you can imagine if you had a range either going over to the right horizontally or down vertically, if it goes down to like, let's say row 50, when you click and drag, Excel gets a little excited and it may overshoot it to like row 100. That gets a little annoying, so if you know your range, it might be easier to type it in than clicking and dragging. And then just go ahead and hit enter. Fabulous. Well, we get our error. We can go ahead and click in the cell, click on the drop-down arrow, and ignore it for this one as well. Another way to insert a function besides, let's select the next cell, typing in equals SUM, and you see the symbol FX. Well, that symbol is also up here on the formula bar FX, meaning that you can go ahead and click on it to open up the insert function window. Let me hit the escape key a couple of times to get out of the cell and come up here and click on it to show you the insert function window. Now, why would you want to do it this way as opposed to typing it in? Well, it gives you a bit more detail than just what you see when you type it in. For example, let's go ahead and look up a function first, and there's quite a few ways to do it. You can either go ahead and type it in the box up above and click go, or you can click on the drop-down arrow besides the most recently used, which, well, sum was the most recently used, so it's there, so I could just go ahead and select it. You can see down below the syntax of it, and then the synopsis of it adds up all numbers in a range of cells. And if you need help on this function, go ahead and click on the hyperlink, but we'll go ahead and continue here that if it's not the most recently used, you can click on the drop-down arrow and see if it's in one of the categories, like maybe math and trig, and they're sorted alphabetically. If it's not there, probably the best thing to do is click on the drop-down arrow and choose all, outside of actually typing in the name of the function if you can remember how to spell it. In any case, you can go ahead and click and drag, and it's sorted alphabetically down to the S's. And there it is. And then go ahead and click OK. Or, like I said, if you don't want to click and drag to search it, then you can delete it here and type in SUM and say go, and it found it, or it recommended it down below. With it selected, click Okie dokie, and there we go. We got our function arguments window, and in the first number, in this case our range, it's already got something in there. Let me click and drag the title bar down so we can see what we're looking at. And it's got the column H. Well, why has it got column H? It's because it's got numbers adjacent to it, so Excel's trying to define a pattern to help you out to say, okay, I assume you want the numbers that are closest to the cell that contains the function. No. So that's okay. Let's just go ahead and type it in the first field here, the number 1 field, and say it's going to be, for this row, row 9, but for the first column, it'll be C. So C9, colon, through, and then the last column is F, same row, 9. And then notice over to the right-hand side, it defines all the cells that are within that range, or that it can squeeze in here. And so the first cell is 19 to 10, 19 to 10, and then 15, 15, and so on. So at least we can verify what we have typed in here in case if what we're typing in the function here we don't see in our main view and it's on row HH, but we're familiar with what we want to include in here. So when we type in HH9 through HZ9 and the numbers don't look familiar and you're like, wow, those are huge numbers, that's not what I'm looking for, then that's an indicator that you probably have the wrong range selected. So that can be helpful. And then down below it gives us the total of it already, the formula result, and then the formula result here as well. And you can include additional ranges, but before we do that, you can either type it in or, let me delete it, you can click on this collapsible dialog box button, because when you click on it, it actually collapses the box. And then you can go ahead and click and drag the title bar down to find your range, click and drag, and then to open it back up, once you selected your range, you can either click on it to pop it open, or let me click on it again to collapse it, hit the Enter key on the keyboard to pop it back open. And then if you have another range that includes cells for the same person for additional months, then go ahead and click on that, collapse it, select the range. I know it's not the correct range, but when I hit Enter, you can see how it can get progressive here, one range after another. So let me go ahead and hit the backspace key to get rid of that range, and then click Okie dokie, and there you go. Now, in addition to that, not only on the formula bar, but if you look on the Formulas tab, let's go down to the next cell, you also have the Insert function. Click on it, opens up the same window, close out, or you can come up here and you've got these different categories. There's the logical with all the functions in there. If you want to go ahead and, well, it's not in there, click off and look for it. More functions, statistical, engineering. Oh, it's just going crazy. Let's go ahead and click off. You do have the auto sum. So when you click on the drop-down arrow, the sum, when you hover over it, is the sum function. And you can see in the pop-up, it's got equal sum. And what's cool is that when you click on it, it's automatically going to choose a range for you. But you're like, no, not that range. All you have to do, if you want a different range, is just go ahead and click and drag the correct range and then just hit enter, and that goes pretty fast. And then, if you notice up here on the Formulas tab, you also have the Insert Function button that you can click on, and it brings up the same window. Let's go ahead and close out. Let's go down to the next cell, and you've got the function library, so if you want to look for a function, click on one of the corresponding drop-down arrows for those that are logical, look up references, also more functions. Ooh, it's just getting cheesy. Let's go ahead and click off. You also have the auto sum, which is a quick summing up of a range. It gets a lot faster than you typing it in, and you can see in the pop-up it is the sum function. It's just called auto sum because it'll automatically do it for you. How does that work? Well, you can click on it and it automatically selects a range. Now it's selecting the cells that are next to it because they have something in it, assuming that that's what you want. It's trying to be helpful, but it's not, but I appreciate that. Let's go ahead and click and drag to select the correct range so we can reshift its focus or selection for this employee ID, and then just go ahead and hit enter, and there we go. And you'll see that not only can you click on it, but when you click on the drop down arrow, you also get the auto average, auto count numbers, max, min. So if I come up here, and let's do it for the averages, so we can get the average cell for this employee for the first 4 months. Come up here, click on the drop down arrow. Let's do auto average. Again, it just goes out and finds the first cell that contains numbers, and it wants to select it. And if there's no adjacent cells next to it, it won't go beyond it. So that's not the range. Go ahead and click and drag and select the correct range, hit enter, and there's the average cell for this employee for the 4 months. And he averaged about 17,000. And then once you have that, since we want to get it for the rest of the employee IDs, you can go ahead and copy and paste it, or the quickest way to copy and paste, since the cells are adjacent, just go ahead and select the first one that contained the average function. Hover over the lower right hand corner, that little square, until you can see the black cross, the autofill handle, and then just click and drag down, click off, and did it do it correctly? Go ahead and select the next one down below and see if the average is still in the same row, 7, as the original. No, you can see up here it's in the next row, 8. So as you copy and paste it down, it also wants to update the formula and go down with you. So that makes the autofill handle or copying and pasting relative and not absolute. If you want to find the lowest or highest value within a given range, like for the month of January, I want to find out which employee ID had the lowest sales. You can see down below I've got my lowest and highest, or our minimum and maximum functions. So instead of looking at it and eyeballing it, going, okay, let's see, 10,000 looks like it's the lowest. I mean, that's easy when you have just a small range to work with, but you can imagine if it was huge, why go through all that work and eyeballing it? Go ahead and use the, well, in this case, the minimum function to find the lowest value within the range. And there's a couple ways you can insert the function, as we talked about in the previous training video. You can hit the equals key on the keyboard and then just type in MINKEYMOUSE, no, just MIN for minimum function. And you can see down below it's highlighted, and it says in the pop-up it returns the smallest number in a set of values, and it will ignore logical values in text. So if I go ahead and I select January as part of the range, it's going to ignore that. So now that I have it highlighted, hit the tab key on the keyboard to pop it open. There's the syntax, and it says, okay, what's the first range, or number 1? So the first range, I can just go ahead and click and drag to select it and say that's it. If I had an additional range, like I also want to include the minimum in February to find out between the 2 months which one has the lowest value, then hit comma, and then go ahead and click and drag to select it. Now you don't have to select it. You can, of course, go ahead and type it in. If what you want to enter is not in your viewable area, like maybe it's over in column HH, in which case you can, of course, go ahead and type in HH 7 through, and then same column HH row 10. In any case, let's go ahead and get rid of that, and let's just keep it simple and do the selected range for January up above and hit enter. And there you go, there's the lowest value for that given range. The other way that you can do it, and let's do it for the maximum now to find the highest value within that range, which is going to be 35,000, is instead of typing in the equals key, you can come up here on the formula bar and click on FX, opens up the insert function window, or you can close out and come up here on the formulas tab, click on the same button that we just clicked on, that was down below in the formula bar, or you can go ahead and click on one of the drop down arrows to find the minimum maximum functions. But let's just go ahead and do it right here, since it's so obvious that no matter what tab we're on, that we don't have to click on the formulas tab to access it. So click on it. And the reason why you may want to do it this way is because if you don't know anything about the function or you want to learn more about it, It's got it right here. That is, once you find it, and so there's the minimum because it was the most recent. Now we want to find the maximum. Well, it's right there. Another recent one that we've used, or just go ahead and delete that and type in max, click go. It's right there. Maximum returns the largest value in a set of values and ignores logical values in text. Great, go ahead and click okie dokie. Opens up the function arguments window, and it says, well, right now it's looking at cell C15. Why? Because it's looking at cells that are adjacent to it that contain numbers to try to help you out, thinking, okay, that's probably the start of where you want to look. No, it's up here. So you can either go ahead and come in the number 1, delete it, and then type in your range, and it's going to be C7 through, which is colon, and then C10, and then you can see over to the right, it gives you the data within that range. There's C7, there's C8, C9, C10, and that matches up. Great. Or you can just go ahead and delete it and click on the collapsible dialog box button so it collapses the window. Go ahead and click and drag, then hit the enter key on the keyboard to pop it back open, and you can do a second range. Like, well, without even clicking on the collapsible dialog box button, if you click and drag another range, it automatically collapses, and then when you're done selecting it, it pops it back open. Now you may think, hey, I want to do it that way. That's great if you can see the data, but if you can't, then you may want to collapse it so you can see what's behind it, because you only got so much space to move this thing around when it's expanded. So click on that button to expand it, or hit the enter key on the keyboard. It'll expand it without accepting it. So once it's open, then you can go ahead and accept it by hitting the enter key on the keyboard, which, by the way, you see how OK is highlighted in blue there? That means that that button's active. So when you hit enter on the keyboard, it's going to activate the highlighted button, meaning the same thing as if you just clicked on OK. So if I hit enter, which I won't do that because I don't want that one, and I hit enter now, it accepts it, and let's see, by double clicking on it, it's got the range up above, highlighted in blue, and the highest in there is 35,000. And then, instead of repeating the same thing and inserting the function over and over again for February, March, and April, you can either copy and paste it or use the autofill handle. So if I go ahead and I select this and I do Control-C to copy, then I click in here and do Control-V as in Victor to paste, Control-V as in Victor to paste, Control-V to paste, that works. Or you can go ahead and hover over the cell, and if the cells are adjacent, you can use the autofill handle by hovering over the lower right-hand corner until you can see the black cross, and then you can click and drag, and voila. So let's see if it checks out. Looking up here in the formula bar, it's the max formula, not for column C because it updated with the autofill handle to column D. And the highest value within there is 15,000. Now, one last thing that I forgot to mention in the previous training video, when you use the autofill feature, for example, when it's being used in columns, there's actually a quicker way when you're using the autofill handle. So for example, if I go ahead and delete the averages here, and let's say I just entered the average for the first employee ID here, and I want to use the autofill handle, as we did in the previous training video, to click and drag it down to automatically copy and paste that formula into the adjacent cells. Instead, if you want to autofill the column really fast, go ahead and hover over the lower right-hand corner till you see the black cross, and then double-click really fast, and voila. You don't even have to click and drag. Double-click will do it. Will it do it as far as rows? No. Let me go ahead and delete that, and then select the first cell, and double-click really fast. It doesn't go over. It'll only go down. So I have to click and drag for rows, going column to column, as opposed to a column going from row to row. Double-click, and it automatically fills it in that column. What you're looking at here is my Dreamforce payroll database, where we got a list of all our employees and, well, the total number of hours they worked that week, their hourly rate, and then the multiplication between the two gives us their weekly gross pay for that week. And the two functions that I want to focus on are the count and count A. First of all, the count, you can see the definition to the right of it. It'll count up all the cells with the number. Well, how is that going to work? Well, for example, if I want to find out how many employees worked this week or logged in hours or a number, let's count up how many actually worked by counting up the number of cells that they have numbers in or that they logged their hours in. Well, you can eyeball it pretty quickly just by counting up the cells, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but you can imagine if you had a huge database, that's going to take a while. Better yet, let's go ahead and use the count function. So hit the equals key on the keyboard and type in the first couple of letters of count until you can see it highlighted. And you can see over the left-hand side the explanation for the count. It counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. So with the highlighted, hit the tab key to pop open the syntax. So you can see that the first value or range is what we're going to be selecting. Just go ahead and click and drag to select it. And then if you want to select another range in addition to that, then hit the comma on the keyboard and it pops open to the second value or second range and so on. So let's go ahead and hit the backspace key because I don't want to focus on 2, 3, or 4 more ranges, just this one. Hit the enter key on the keyboard and there you go. Counts up 7. Oh, that's slick. Now don't confuse that with the count down below on the status bar. So for example, when you select a range of cells, it says count down below, right? It's not the same as the one up here that the count function we use to count up the number of cells. This one, when you hover over it, says it's the number of cells selected that contain data. Not numbers, data. So if I come over here and select that range doesn't have any numbers in it, just data, so it's counting them up. In that selected range, we have a total of 8 that contain data. Well, let me select one more before it. Still 8 because the first one doesn't contain data out of the 9 that I have selected. So keep that in mind. And in fact, if you want to do a shortcut and not have to type in the function to count up all cells with a number, then just come down here and right-click on the status bar because it is customizable, as we talked about in an earlier training video. There's the count. Here's the numerical count. Just go ahead and check it and then click off. And select a range again. And then down below you got the count and numerical count. Now this counts up all the cells that contain data, which makes sense because it counts up whether or not it has numbers, text, or a combination or both. But this one will actually count up only those cells that contains numbers. So that one is true to form with using the count function, where the other one is just data, not numbers. So let's go ahead and do count A, and it counts up cells that are not empty. Well, how's that going to work? Like for example, if you want to find out how many employees have benefits out of our 10, you can count them up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or use the count A function. Again, cells that have something in them or that are not empty. So equals count, and it's right there, so I can just hit the down arrow key and you can see it says counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty, that have something in them. Hit the tab key to pop open the count function. You have the first value, could be a value or range of cells here. So you can go ahead and click and drag to select it. And then if we have other ranges, we don't. Let's hit enter on the keyboard and there you go. Counts the cells that are not empty, that have something in them. And so we can say that out of 10 employees, 8 have benefits. We want to give all our employees benefits, and we want to find out just off the top of our head if we have to hold another presentation to kind of nudge those other 2 employees to sign on for benefits. They pay an extra $50 a month to get all the benefits. That way we don't have to go through and start counting one at a time to see how many there are, but use the count A function, those cells that have something in them or that are not empty. What you're looking at here are 2 mini databases of camping gear sold in both the US and the UK. We're going to be using these to learn how to move, copy, cut, and paste our data. Now for those of you who already know the basics, you may want to hang with me because, like with all my training videos, what you see in the title, the name of it, I try to add more than just what's there. I can't say move, copy, cut, and paste and more advanced. I try to keep it simple for those who want to learn the basics. So see if I can teach you something new, but first we got to start with the basics to get everybody up to speed who doesn't know the basics. To get started, I want to go ahead and add up the total for this employee ID for the months of January through April. To do that, I'm going to come up here and click on the Formula tab, go to the Function Library. Let's click on AutoSum. And it wants to add up including the employee ID, and I don't want that, so I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag the range that I want it to add up, which is January through April, and hit Enter. Now once I have the formula there, I'd like to add the formula also to the adjacent cells here and also into the camping gear in the UK down below. Now you can do it a couple of ways that we already learned in an earlier training video, and that was to go ahead and select the cell and then hover over the bottom right hand corner until you can see the black autofill handle, the black cross. You can click and drag that down and it'll automatically fill in the formula, copy it down into adjacent cells, and it will be a relative reference, meaning that it doesn't copy the exact same reference this cell has, which is row 6, but it updates it to row 7. Otherwise we'd have the exact same number here. So it updates it. Let me go ahead and hit undo. Or you can copy and paste, which to copy you can right click on the cell, go down to copy, or come up here on the Home tab to the clipboard group and click on the copy button, or as you can see in the pop-up, the shortcut key is Control-C to copy. When I do that, it puts it in copy mode. You get the marching ants that go around it saying, okay, this cell is in copy mode. What cell do you want to paste it to? Well, it's going to be the next one down below. And then once I have it selected, I can right-click on that cell to get my different paste options. And since we haven't learned all the others, we'll just keep it simple and go with the first one. And you can see when I hover over it, it shows me the result of it, a preview of it in cell H7. without me having to click on it, because when I hover out of it, it's no longer there. You can do it that way. You can come up here on the Home tab to the Clipboard group and click on the Paste button. Well, let me click off here and then come up here to show you that when you hover over it, you can also use the shortcut keys Control-V as in Victor. So if I do shortcut keys Control-V to paste it, cool. Now it's still in copy mode, so I can go down to the next cell and do Control-V, and go to the next cell, Control-V, but I got a quicker way than that. Let me hit undo. Undo. And if you want to get out of the marching ant mode because you no longer want to copy that, you can hit the escape key on the keyboard, but we want to stay in copy mode, but we want to go ahead and copy this cell, Control-C, but in a different way. Instead of selecting each cell to paste it in, and you can say, look, just click and drag and in the pane here, the autofill handle to fill it up. Well, I want to show you when you paste it, not only can you paste it in a single click in this range without having to select each cell, but also in a non-adjacent range here. So having said that, let's go ahead and click and drag and select the range. And then as we learned in an earlier training video, when you want to select nonlinear cells, then go ahead and hold down the Control key and click and drag the next range. So we have one cell that's in copy mode with a total of 7 other cells that we have selected that we want to paste that cell into, or the contents of that cell, the formula. With it selected, you can go ahead and right click on the selection, go down to paste, and notice I haven't clicked on it. It gives me a preview of it. Looks good. Go ahead and click paste. There we go. Cool. Wasn't that a spiffy? Let's go ahead and double check to make sure it's correct. So if I come down here to make sure it's a relative reference, so it updates it. So since it's no longer in row 6 or in Kansas anymore, it's now in row 17, that when I double click on it, it's selecting row 17 and not up here row 6. So that's what we call relative reference when you copy and paste a formula. It's got to update, because if it's not in the same row and it's in a new row, then you want to, well, in this case, make sure that you're adding up the range for that employee and not the one up here, and putting it down here assuming that's going to be for that employee. And we'll talk about absolute and relative references in a later training video, but for right now, it's good that it's relative, so we can have the same formula in other cells that'll update and match that row that it's in. So row 17, great for that employee ID. Let me hit the escape key to get back out. Next, let's learn how to move a cell or arrange the cells around. So if I go ahead and select the total cell, you can see it's highlighted, the border of it, on all 4 sides in green. So if I hover over the border of the selected cell, I get a 4-way arrow, which means that when I click and hold the border, I can move it 4 directions, up, down, left, or right. There we go. Let me go ahead and hit undo. You can also do it to arrange the cells by, well, make sure that when you select the range that you get the white cross, that you don't hover over the border of the cell to select the range down below, because otherwise you're moving it over something else, and that's not good unless you intend to do it. Which, by the way, congratulations, we know how to do it. Click cancel. We don't want to replace this cell with that. So instead, get the white cross, then click and drag to select the range, and then you can hover over any one of the 4 borders of the selected range to then click and drag the border and move it around. Yippee skippy. There we go. I'm going to throw you for a loop now. How about if I go ahead and I'm looking at the totals, but I also want the totals as a label down below, the employees, so you can get the totals for all the employees for the month of January, February, March, and April. You could go ahead and type in the totals here if you'd like, or you can go ahead and select the totals up here, hover over the border, and click and drag it and put it down below. Now you'd say, wait a second, if I do that, then it's moving the totals. Well, yes, that is until I hold down the Control key. Now look at my pointer. When I hold down the Control key, it adds the plus sign to the right of it. That means it's in copy mode. I don't know if you can see it, but when I let go of the left mouse button, then the Control key, it copies it. Isn't that fun? So you can do it here as well. Hold down the Control key, click and drag the border of totals, put it right there. Great. You can also do entire columns or rows. For example, if you want to select a row, just click on the row header, and this row is 13. You can see that when I hover over it, I get a black arrow pointing to the right. When you see it, click on it, it selects the entire row. Then if you click on it and drag it either up or down, it selects the adjacent rows. So if I want to go ahead and click on column H, click on the column header. You can click and drag left or right, of course. And then to actually move it, you can right click on the column header, and then you get your options of cutting, or you can use the pair of scissors on the Home tab in the Clipboard group, or use the shortcut keys Control X. Which, wait a second, how do you know the shortcut keys for cutting? You can come up here and look at the pair of scissors, and you can see in the pop-up Control X. So if you want to know the shortcut keys for any command, hover over it and see if it has one available. And then if I go ahead and, with it selected, do Control X, now wait a second, it gives me the marching ants. Well, doesn't copying also give me the marching ants? That's true. The only way that you can find out if you're in cut or copy mode is to actually maybe hit the escape and do it over again. because there's no different with those marching ants. So if I go ahead and do Control X again, and I'm like, okay, let me go ahead and paste it over here, like on column J, click on column J, and then do Control V as in Victor to paste it. Isn't that great? Now, as a side note, you could also right-click, let me hit undo, and hit the escape key to get out of that mode. That when I click on column H and I right-click and I go down to cut, if you right-click on another column, not only do you get the paste option, which is fabulous, by the way, I just taught you that, you can also insert cut cells. Ooh, how does that work? It means that when I put it on top of a column, it doesn't paste over it, it inserts it. So it pushes column I over and inserts it there, and so everything gets shifted. Well, probably to prove my point, let me hit the escape key to get out of it, is that if I take this row, 9, and it begins with 4, 5, 6, and I insert it on top of 7, it doesn't paste it over it unless I say paste over it, but if I insert it, it'll actually take this row and push it down, and so 2, 3, 4 will now be in row 8, and 3, 4 will now be in 9, and then 4, 5, 6 will now be in row 7. Want to see? Alrighty. Right-click on 9, go down to cut. Right-click on 7, and then instead of pasting it to overwrite it, let me get out of that. Let's go down to Insert Cut Cells, and everything gets bumped down to make way for, hey, 4, 5, 6. So 2, 3, 4 gets pushed down, and then below that, 3, 4, 5 gets bumped down. Everybody has to roll over and get knocked out of the bed to make way for the insert. And then finally, when it comes to copying cells, if you got a lot of copying to do, like you want to copy this or that range, and then paste over here, and then come back and copy this, then go over there and come back and copy that, that can be annoying. The way around that is you can use what's called the clipboard. So if I come up here and I do January, Control C to copy it, where does it go? It goes to the clipboard. Where's that? Up here on the Home tab in the clipboard group, and you can click on its expandable dialog box button, and it opens up the clipboard, and there it is. So you didn't know this, but every time you were copying and pasting or even cutting and pasting, you had to go somewhere to hold it until it was ready to dump it wherever you placed your mouse and clicked in a cell to paste it. So if you have a lot of things to do, instead of going back and forth, just add them to the clipboard, because with this open, it'll start adding up to a total of 24. In fact, you can see down below in the status bar it says 1 of 24 on the clipboard. Where if I didn't see the clipboard, whatever I copied and then paste, it can only do one at a time. But now since I have this open, I can add up to 24. So if I do February, copy, Control C, or if I want to come over here and you can do Control X to cut it, it adds it over here. And if I'm like, oh, I made a mistake, you can click on the drop down arrow and delete it. And then you still got your clipboard open. You don't have to add it to it. And just whatever that you want to, Control C to copy, and maybe an entire range to Control C to copy, that you want to go ahead and paste another part of your worksheet or even on another sheet. And when I go to another sheet, this clipboard is still open. So I can go ahead and click on it to add it. Or when you hover over it, you can click on the drop down arrow, as we just did, to paste it there as well. Or you can right click, it brings up the shortcut menu to paste or delete it from the clipboard. You also, when I click off in a blank area, the paste all command, and it pastes everything that's on the clipboard. Ooh, that's fun. Or you can go to an entirely different workbook, click on File, go down to New, click on Blank Workbook. The clipboard stays with you. It's part of the Windows feature that allows you to not just stay in one application and not open up another, because if I open up Microsoft Word, right click in the jump list to Word, hey, look at that, the paste option's there as well, meaning that something's on there. Click Paste, and there you go. You can click to expand it to open up the clipboard and even paste what you copied in Excel into Microsoft Word. Woohoo! Let's go ahead and close out of that, not save it. And let's go ahead and click Clear All, close out of it, and then go ahead and close out of that. We're back to our original workbook that we started this training video with. Close out of the clipboard there, go back to, hit the delete key on the keyboard to get rid of it, go back to sheet 1. And then one final thought when it comes to copying and pasting or cutting and pasting is that if I select a range here and I go ahead and let's do the copy, I don't have to select an entire range to match what I'm copying over into, because if I select a cell above and I do Control V as in Victor, it'll automatically say, oh, what you've got over in the selection here is more than what fits into the cell, so I'll automatically dump it into the adjacent cells down below. And if there's something else below that it can't squeeze it into, then it'll override it, in which case you may not want that and you'll have to undo it and try it again. Hit the escape key to get out of the marching ants. As you recall in earlier training videos, when you typed in or inserted a function or formula, as you can see in this example in cell C12, Up in the formula bar, it's referencing all C's, or the same column for all the employees who made sales in the month of January. So I can go ahead and copy that and paste it into the new column here for the month of February. And does it keep the same column reference C? No, it updates it relative to the new column, which is D, so I don't get the same value by having these as all C's, but the new column, column D. Again, that's called a relative reference, and by default that's what Excel does. Well, what if you have a formula that when you copy and paste it to other cells, you don't want it to update relative to a new row if you paste it in a new row, or a new column if you paste it into another column? Well, first of all, why would you want to do that? And second of all, how does that work? Well, let me show you in this example. I want to be able to calculate the commissions for each employee, the totals that they made for the sales in the months of January through April, by taking the total and multiplying it by 8%. So to type in a formula that will multiply those two cells together, hit equals, and then select one cell. Doesn't matter which one you want to select first. And then the symbol to multiply is the asterisk. Type that in, and then select the other cell, which is the total cell, and then hit enter, and you're done. Hopefully that's in thousands of dollars, otherwise $44 per commission. That's not a lot. Next, you'd go ahead, or I would take this and copy it and paste it into the other cells, or better yet, I'd select it, and since the cells are adjacent, I use the black autofill handle by hovering over the lower right hand corner on that little tiny green square until I can see a black cross. Then I click and drag it down to automatically copy and paste that into its adjacent cells. Oh, wait a second, what's going on here? What the fudge? How come it's not giving me what I want? It's giving me 0 and some value issue. And the best way to figure this out, what's going on, is to double click in it to pull up the formula for that cell. And notice that it's going to the next row, which is relative, and that makes sense because we're no longer in row 7, we're in row 8, so H8 makes sense, same column. But what about the commission? The commission is always going to be in row 3, column H, but by default, Excel wants to update it relative to us going down one cell. So when we go down one cell, it also shifts it from H3, or row 3, to 4. And then as we go down to the next one, it goes to 5. That's why we get the value issue, because it's like, look, when I take a number, let me hit the escape key and double click on that. When I take a number and multiply it by something that has text in it, let me hit the escape key. What's the value of that? It can't figure it out. It's a value issue. Where these other two cells right here, that when you double click on it, it's doing the empty cell above and below the total cell. And so when you take a number and multiply it by 0, you get 0. So what we need to do is to tell this cell, H3, to be absolute, to be constant, to don't update as we copy and paste this formula one row after another, but to always stay in that same row. How do you do that? Let me hit the escape key, and let's go back and start with our original formula here in cell J7, double click. And to make H3 an absolute reference to always stay there when we update it and go down row by row, and also if you went over column by column, then come up here. You can do it in the formula bar or actually do it in the cell here in edit mode, but I'll come up here in the formula bar. And we need to add some symbols before the cell H3 that tells it to always stay put. And the key that I use to add those symbols is F4. When you hit F4, it adds $signs before the column H and the row 3. The $signs represent absolute or constants, meaning that don't move, you stay. Like your dog, Fido. Stay, Fido, stay. Which, by the way, Fido begins with the letter F, and there's 4 letters in Fido. F4. Hey, that's how I remember things. In any case, when I go ahead and I hit enter, and then I copy and paste it into other cells, it won't shift it down relative to the next row when I go down one row, and then down 2 rows to row 5 to the total cell, and so on. But before I go ahead and copy and paste it down, let me double click and go over one more thing. And we can do it right here. You can see it better in color. You've got the $sign before H and before 3. Now, the $sign before H says never move it or never get out of column H. Well, am I really moving out of column H when I go down row by row? No. So I can actually get rid of the $sign, the absolute reference in front of H, and hit enter, and then go ahead and copy and paste it by selecting it, clicking and dragging it down, and that works, right? Because if I was going and copying and pasting the formula from one column to the next, then without an absolute reference, double click in front of the H, it's going to go from column H over to column I. Same row, but there's nothing in column I, right, for row 3. So I didn't really need to add the extra $sign in front of H, because as I'm going down row by row, it's going to be in the same column. But if I'm going over column by column, it's going to be in the same row, but I need to go ahead and make sure it keeps it in that column. So again, you can either type in the dollar signs. You don't have to hit the F4 key. There's no magic in that, except that it adds the dollar signs for you. So I can just go ahead and type it in there, hit enter. And if I come up here, click and drag down by using the autofill handle, copies in the same thing. It knows that it's going to be staying in the same column because that's the relative reference, but moving it row by row, but it becomes constant or absolute when I tell it with the dollar sign to not move out of that row. And then of course, because all these cells are linked through formulas or functions, they perform a symbiotic relationship. In other words, you've got the commission that are dependent upon these other cells. So if I come up here and I change it from 8% to 10%, hit enter, it updates their commission. And vice versa, if I come over here for their cells for this employee and I update that, that total is based upon it. So if I type in 500, hit enter, updates the total, but because that formula is also based upon that, multiplying it by the commission, it updates that as well. If you haven't watched the previous training video on absolute references, well, this one on mixed references is going to be mixed for you, pun intended. You may want to watch absolute so you have an idea of what I'm going to be talking about here, because a mixed reference is a combination of a relative reference and an absolute. So let's start from scratch. First off, what you're looking at here is the commission rates that I set for the areas north, south, east, and west for each quarter. And we want to multiply those commission rates by the total sales we have for each quarter. And that's how we're going to get our total commission for each area. So for the commission rate quarter one for area north, they get 12% of the total sales because they did okay, as opposed to west. Woohoo! They really worked hard, and so they get a bigger chunk of a percentage of the total sales for quarter one. So to start, we want to figure the commission rate for the north. We're going to use a simple formula, hit the equals key on the keyboard to take the total sales for quarter one, and you can see it's commission for quarter one. So the total sales to multiply, and the symbol for multiplication is asterisk, so go ahead and type that in. And we want to multiply it by the percentage that they get of the total sales for quarter one. Select that cell, that's it, hit enter, we're done. But the problem that we run into if we're not inputting this and typing it in every single cell, which could be a little bit timely, as opposed to copying and pasting the formula, which we can go ahead and do by selecting the cell and then hovering over the bottom right hand corner and getting the black cross, the autofill handle with a double click automatically copies and pastes the formula into the adjacent cells in that column, row by row. But we get a bunch of gobbledygook. So we've got 0, which, hey, that's not a good commission because 15% of $2.5 million is not 0. So what's happening is that when you double click on the cell, you can see that it's a relative reference. We have nothing to tell this formula to always stay in that row for this column. So when we go down one row, this also is relative and goes down a row. And so when you go down 2 rows, as we go down to east, then it goes down to com Q1 or commission for quarter one. So it's taking that, a combination of text and one number there, and multiplying it by 10%. What's the value of that? It can't compute multiplying text with a percentage. And so hit the escape key, double click, and you can see, and then it goes down for 17% multiplied by what's below that because we went down 3 rows. So it's going to go down 3 rows. Hit the escape key. Let's go back to the original cell here, double click. And what we need to do is we need to go ahead and tell it that for this reference, D6, to not make it relative, to always stay in that row. The column we don't care about because we're not copying it over to the next column or to the column in front of it, but just the row. So what we can do, as you recall in the previous training video, to add an absolute reference, just go ahead and click in front of the cell. And you can do it one of a couple of ways. You can either hit the F4 key and it adds the dollar signs for both the column and the row, which you don't need it for both. I mean, it doesn't hurt it if you put it in there as far as what we're doing right now, copying it row by row. So having a dollar sign or the absolute reference for D isn't going to make a difference. But if you hit the F4 key again, it toggles over to removing the reference from column D to row 6, F4 again, then it goes to column D, but not row 6, F4 again, and it removes the absolutes completely from D6. So there's the toggle F4, but since I don't want to toggle through it, I just want to add the dollar sign quickly to row 6 so it doesn't update as I copy and paste down row by row. Then let's go ahead and just type in the dollar sign for 6, and that's it. Hit enter, and then when I come back up here, and I click or double click on the black cross in the lower right hand corner for that formula to quickly copy and paste it into all the adjacent cells down below, it works. Well, let's double check. Let's go ahead and randomly pick a cell here and double click on it to see if it's referencing the total sales for quarter one and multiplying it by the commission. Yes. So it's staying on that row, row 6. It doesn't update it as I copy and paste the formula down row by row. Cool. Let me hit the escape key to get back out of that. And then next, we want to go ahead and copy this formula and configure it for the sales in quarter 2, multiply it by the same commission 12% in quarter 3 and quarter 4. So if I hover over the lower right hand corner of that cell until I can see the black cross, and then I click and drag it over to the right and let go, what the fudge? What's happening? What are these pound symbols? The pound symbol represents a larger number that cannot be seen in that column. So instead of giving you a partial number, like let's say we couldn't see all these numbers, we could only see 3. Well, our total commission is $3. That's deceptive, right? So since it can't show you all of the number, it's not going to show you any part of it, so you're not deceived. So what you can do, if you want to see the number, well, you can hover over the cell and you can see in the pop-up, whew, that's a huge number. Or you can come up here to the right of that column header until you can see arrows pointing in opposite directions, and you can click and drag it until you can finally see the entire number, because Excel's not going to show you partial numbers because that's deceptive. Or better yet, if I click and drag it and push it back in, and then the shortcut for doing this is called the auto fit, with the mouse hovered over in between those two column headers, but to the right of the column that you want to expand, double click really fast and it does a best fit or an auto fit. It takes a cell that has the most content and fits the column to that. And so it stretches it out and we can see it there. Ooh, cool. I don't want to do that. Let's hit undo a couple of times so we can go back to about the size it was before, because that's not correct. Because if you take a look at it and double click within the cell, what's the reference? It's not taking the 12% over here and multiplying it by the sales in quarter 2, is it? It's going to commission that we earn in quarter 1 and multiplying it by the sales in quarter 2, in which case we bankrupt the company because they can't handle that big of a number. So what we have to do now is we have to tell it to stay in column C when we copy and paste it over column by column. And so we're looking at the reference D9, red to red here, right? And the name of the column is not D because that's the one that we're in. If we want it to stay in C. So when we copy and paste, it doesn't keep moving over and over. So when I hit the escape key and go to the last one to double click, because we moved over 3 columns, when we clicked and dragged it, it went over 3 as well. 1, 2, 3. Ugh. So let's hit the escape key. Let's go back to the original formula here and double click and add an absolute reference to the column C. So when we copy it over column by column, that $sign in front of the C tells Excel, do not move out of this cell here, or this column more specifically, when we copy and paste it over into the next column. So to do that, we'll go ahead and add a $sign in front of it, and that's it. Now it's called mixed references is because we've got a $sign for one reference of the cell, which is referring to the column, and one without, which makes it relative. That is if we go down row by row, it'll update row by row. But since we're going over column by column, it's going to update it column by column, except that we added a $sign or an absolute reference that says don't do that. Stay in the same column. It doesn't hurt, again, to go ahead and do $signs for both if we're just going over column by column. But to get a little bit more particular, we'll just go ahead and add it to the C because that's the only thing we're focusing on, is to keep it in column C. So go ahead and hit enter and then select the cell that contains the correct formula now. And you can see up in the formula bar we have mixed references for D6, which means keep it on row 6 when we go down. So that makes sense because we're multiplying quarter 1 by all the percentages here. And when we go over column by column, keep it in the C column. Don't update it and move it over from 12% commission to multiply it by, well, the commission for quarter 1. So hover over again the lower right hand corner until you can see the autofill handle. Click and drag it over to the right. Let go. Hey, that works. Fabulous. But wait, let's double check. Go ahead and double click inside of a cell and make sure that the commission rate for column 3 for area north is taking the cells for quarter 3 and multiplying it for the commission that's been assigned to the north, 12%. Cool. And hit enter. And so let's finish this up. If I go ahead and select the entire row here, and with that selection hover over the lower right hand corner to get the black cross and double click really fast. Cool. Now let's double check to make sure it's right. So we'll select a cell at random and double click. It looks good. For the east, we got the commission rate for the total sales of quarter 3 multiplied by it. That's going to give us what we want. Totally tinsel. Thanks for watching. Hey, as a quick reminder, if you like my video, please give it a thumbs up. You can also click on me and subscribe to my channel to get notified of the latest videos. And for all my training, please visit me at my website, dreamforce.us.